Hello friends. About 70% of the friends who watch my videos are not subscribed, and I would be really happy if you do so. Also, don't forget to hit the like button and leave your comments. Your interaction makes the content reach everyone and contributes to the growth of the channel. Thank you all. It was a crisp October evening in 1992 when I, Gerald Martin, decided to take a week off from my job as a mechanic in Pittsburgh. At 43 years old, I was feeling the wear and tear of city life and yearned for some peace and quiet. I chose a small, lesser-known campground near the Allegheny National Forest called Whispering Pines. It seemed perfect for a solitary retreat in my old RV. My friend Leon Haggerty was supposed to join me, but he canceled at the last minute due to work commitments. So I set off alone, my trusty RV loaded with supplies for a week of camping. As I drove along the winding roads leading to Whispering Pines, the urban landscape gradually gave way to rolling hills and dense forests. The autumn colors were in full swing, painting the scenery in vibrant shades of red, orange, and gold. It was a stark contrast to the gray streets of Pittsburgh I'd left behind. I arrived at the campground late in the afternoon. The sun was already dipping below the tree line, casting long shadows across the nearly empty grounds. Only a couple of other campers were scattered about, their RVs and tents barely visible through the trees. I found a secluded spot to park my RV about 50 yards from the shoreline of a small lake. It was perfect, close enough to the water for easy access, but far enough back to give me some privacy. As I set up camp, I noticed an old pickup truck parked about 100 yards away, partially hidden by a cluster of trees. The truck looked like it had seen better days. Its once blue paint was now a patchwork of rust and faded color, and the tires seemed to be slowly sinking into the soft earth. It struck me as odd, but I shrugged it off. Probably belonged to some old-timer who used the lake as his private fishing spot. With the RV parked and leveled, I set up my folding chair by the water's edge. The lake was a mirror, reflecting the sky's fading light and the silhouettes of the surrounding pines. It was breathtaking, and for a moment I forgot all about the stress of my job and the nagging ache in my lower back that had been bothering me for months. As darkness fell, I lit a small campfire and heated up some canned soup for dinner. The night was quiet, almost unnaturally so. No crickets chirping, no frogs croaking, just the occasional pop and crackle from the fire. It should have been peaceful, but something about the silence made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. After dinner, I decided to take a walk around the area, partly to work off the meal and partly to shake off the unease that had settled over me. I grabbed my flashlight and set off along the lake shore. The moon was nearly full, casting an eerie glow over the landscape. Long shadows stretched across the ground, and the trees on the far side of the lake looked like dark sentinels standing guard. As I walked, I noticed something strange, fresh footprints in the mud near the water's edge. Curiosity got the better of me, and I followed the trail. It led away from the lake and towards the old pickup truck I'd noticed earlier. As I got closer, I saw a faint light coming from inside the truck's cab. My heart began to race. Someone was in there. I crept closer, trying to stay quiet. When I reached the truck, I peered through the cracked rear window. What I saw made my blood run cold. A man was hunched over in the back seat, surrounded by piles of ratty clothes and empty food cans. He was muttering to himself, his hands moving frantically as if searching for something. In the dim light of a battery-powered lantern, I could see that his clothes were torn and filthy, his hair a matted mess. I backed away slowly, not wanting to alert him to my presence. But as I turned to leave, I heard his mutterings more clearly. The words were still indistinct, but the tone sent shivers down my spine. It was a mix of fear and anger, punctuated by what sounded like quiet sobs. I hurried back to my RV, my mind racing. Who was that man? Why was he living in that old truck? Was he dangerous? I locked the door behind me and pulled down all the shades. I turned on the small TV, hoping the noise would drown out my thoughts and calm my nerves. Hours passed, and I found myself drifting off to sleep despite my unease. But just as I was about to succumb to exhaustion, a sound jolted me awake. A soft, hesitant knock on the RV door. My heart leaped into my throat. I grabbed the heavy-duty flashlight I kept by the bed. It could serve as a weapon if needed, and approached the door cautiously. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. No response came, just another knock, more insistent this time. I said, "Who's there?" I repeated, louder now. Finally a voice answered, weak, raspy, barely above a whisper. "Please, help me." I hesitated, my hand on the door handle. Everything in me screamed that this was a bad idea, that I should call the police or simply drive away. But something in that voice, the raw desperation, made me pause. Slowly I cracked open the door, keeping the chain lock engaged. The man from the truck stood there, looking even more haggard up close. His eyes were wild, darting back and forth as if expecting something to leap out of the shadows at any moment. "What do you want?" I asked, still not opening the door fully. "Please," he repeated, his voice shaking. "Someone's after me. He's going to kill me. I need help." I weighed my options quickly. We were miles from the nearest town, and cell reception out here was spotty at best. Even if I called the police, it could be hours before they arrived. And if this man was truly in danger... Against my better judgment, I unlatched the chain and opened the door. "Come in," I said, stepping back to let him enter. "But I'm warning you, any funny business and you're out. Got it?" He nodded frantically and stumbled inside. I directed him to sit at the small table while I fetched a bottle of water from the fridge. "What's your name?" I asked as I handed him the water. He gulped it down before answering. "Frank. My name's Frank." "Okay, Frank. Tell me what's going on. Who's after you?" Frank's hands shook as he set down the empty bottle. "I was hiking through the forest a few days ago when I came across this old cabin. It was raining, so I thought I'd take shelter inside. I thought it was abandoned, but..." He trailed off, his eyes going distant. "But what?" I prompted. "There was someone living there, a man. He wasn't right in the head. When he found me, he went berserk, started screaming about trespassers and thieves. He had a knife." Frank's hand unconsciously went to his side, and I noticed a dark stain on his shirt that I hadn't seen before. "Jesus," I muttered. "Did you go to the police?" Frank shook his head vehemently. "I tried, but he followed me. He knows these woods better than anyone. Every time I thought I'd lost him, he'd show up again. I've been running for days. When I saw your RV, I hoped." Just then a loud bang resonated through the RV like something heavy hitting the side. I felt my heart skip a beat. "Stay here," I told Frank, grabbing my flashlight and the hunting knife I kept in a kitchen drawer. With shaking hands, I unlocked the door and stepped outside. The night air was cold, raising goosebumps on my skin. The campfire had died down to glowing embers, casting just enough light to create moving shadows at the edge of my vision. I swept the flashlight beam across the clearing, seeing nothing out of place. I was about to head back inside when a low, menacing voice spoke from the darkness. "Where is he?" I spun around, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. A figure stood at the edge of the clearing, a man, tall and powerfully built. His face was hidden in the shadow of a hood, but I could see the glint of moonlight on the blade of a knife in his hand. "Get out of here," I shouted, trying to sound braver than I felt. "Leave us alone." The man took a step forward. "Give me the little rat and I'll go. Otherwise..." He left the threat hanging in the air. I knew in that moment that there was no reasoning with this man. Whatever had happened between him and Frank, it had pushed him beyond the limits of sanity. I had to protect myself and the terrified man in my RV. I backed towards the door, keeping the flashlight trained on the intruder. Just as my hand found the handle, the man lunged forward with surprising speed. His knife slashed through the air where I had been standing a second before. Instinct took over. I swung the heavy flashlight with all my might, connecting with the side of his head. He staggered back, momentarily stunned. I used that precious moment to dive into the RV, slamming and locking the door behind me. "We need to get out of here now," I yelled to Frank, who was cowering in the corner. I jumped into the driver's seat and turned the key. The engine roared to life just as the man outside began pounding on the door, trying to force his way in. I threw the RV into drive and stomped on the gas. We lurched forward, tires spinning in the soft earth before finding purchase. The attackers' enraged shouts faded as we sped away from the campsite, deeper into the forest on the narrow access road. For what felt like hours, we drove through the night. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat, every bend in the road a potential ambush. Frank sat silently in the passenger seat, jumping at every noise. Finally, we emerged from the forest and found ourselves on a main road. I didn't slow down until I saw the lights of a small town in the distance. I pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour diner, the bright fluorescent lights a stark contrast to the darkness we'd just escaped. "Wait here," I told Frank. I went inside, explained the situation to the startled waitress, and used the phone to call 911. Within minutes, 2 police cruisers pulled into the parking lot, lights flashing. I recounted the whole story to the officers, the footprints by the lake, the man in the truck, the attack at the RV. They took Frank into custody, assuring me they would get him the medical and psychological help he clearly needed. As I watched them drive away, I felt a mixture of relief and lingering fear. The ordeal was over, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't truly finished. The attacker's face, hidden by that hood, haunted my thoughts. He was still out there somewhere in those dark woods, waiting. I spent the rest of the night in the RV, parked under the bright lights of the diner. Sleep was impossible. Every sound made me jump, every shadow seemed to move. As the first light of dawn broke through the darkness, I made a decision. I couldn't go back to my normal life, not yet. The shadow of that night loomed too large. I needed time to process, to heal. I packed up the RV, made sure I had enough supplies, and set off down the highway. I had no destination in mind, just a need to keep moving, to put distance between myself and Whispering Pines. The road stretched out before me, a ribbon of possibility. Maybe, just maybe, I could find peace again. But for now, all I could do was keep driving, keep fighting the memories, and hope that somewhere down this long road I would find the solace I so desperately sought. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself wandering from town to town, never staying in one place for too long. The fear of the hooded man finding me kept me moving, even though rationally I knew he couldn't possibly know where I was. I picked up odd jobs here and there, fixing cars in small garages, doing handyman work for cash. It wasn't much, but it kept gas in the RV and food on the table. More importantly, it kept my mind occupied, preventing it from dwelling too much on that fateful night. One evening, about a month after the incident, I found myself in a small town in Ohio. I'd stopped at a local bar, hoping a drink might help me sleep better that night. As I nursed my beer, I overheard a conversation at the next table that made my blood run cold. "I'm telling you, Jim, something weird is going on in those woods," a gruff voice was saying. "My cousin works for the Forestry Service up there, and he says they've been finding these strange markings on trees, like claw marks but bigger than any bear he's ever seen." "Oh, come on, Bill," his companion replied. "You know your cousin likes to exaggerate. Probably just some kids messing around." "Nah, it's not just that," Bill insisted. "There have been sightings, too. Hikers reporting a large, dark figure moving through the trees. And get this, a couple of campers went missing last week. Search and rescue found their campsite torn to shreds, but no sign of the people." I didn't stick around to hear the rest of the conversation. I left some money on the bar and hurried back to my RV, my heart pounding. Could it be related to what I'd experienced? Or was I just being paranoid, seeing connections where there were none? That night I dreamt of the hooded man. In my dream, he stood at the edge of a dark forest, his face still hidden. But as I watched, he began to change. His body elongated, his fingers stretching into claws. The hood fell back, revealing not a human face, but something other. I woke up in a cold sweat, the image seared into my mind. The next morning I made a decision. I couldn't keep running forever. I needed answers, even if getting them meant facing my fears. I pointed the RV back towards Pennsylvania, towards the Allegheny National Forest. As I drove, I tried to piece together a plan. I couldn't go back to Whispering Pines. The memories were too raw, and I didn't want to risk running into the hooded man again. But maybe I could find that old cabin Frank had mentioned. If it really existed, it might hold some clues about what was going on. I arrived at the outskirts of the forest late in the afternoon. I found a small motel to stay the night, not wanting to camp in the RV so close to where everything had happened. That evening, I went to a local diner, hoping to gather some information. The waitress, a friendly middle-aged woman named Donna, seemed happy to chat as she refilled my coffee. When I casually mentioned I was thinking of doing some hiking in the area, her smile faltered. "Be careful out there," she said, lowering her voice. There's been some strange goings-on in those woods lately. I feigned innocence. Oh? What kind of strange goings-on? Donna glanced around as if making sure no one else was listening. Well, I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but there's been talk of some kind of creature out there. People have been seeing things, hearing things. A couple of hikers even went missing last month. My heart raced, but I kept my voice steady. A creature? What, like a bear? She shook her head. No, something bigger and smarter from what I hear. Look, I'm not saying I believe all the stories, but just be careful, okay? Stick to the main trails and don't go wandering off alone. I thanked her for the advice and left the diner, my mind whirling. The stories matched what I'd overheard in Ohio. Whatever was happening here, it was bigger than just one incident in a campground. The next morning I set out early, my backpack loaded with supplies. I'd studied maps of the area, trying to pinpoint where the cabin Frank had mentioned might be. It was a long shot, but it was all I had to go on. The forest was beautiful in the early morning light, mist curling between the trees, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every rustle in the undergrowth, every snapping twig made me jump. I'd been hiking for a couple of hours when I came across an overgrown path branching off from the main trail. It looked rarely used, almost hidden by the dense foliage. My instincts told me this could be what I was looking for. As I ventured deeper, the forest seemed to close in around me. The trees grew taller and denser, blocking out much of the sunlight. The air became thick and humid, filled with the earthy scent of decaying leaves and damp wood. I pushed on, my senses on high alert. After about an hour of difficult hiking, the path opened up into a small clearing, and there, partially hidden by overgrown vegetation, stood an old, dilapidated cabin. My heart raced as I approached it cautiously. This had to be the place Frank had mentioned. The cabin was in even worse shape than I had imagined. The roof had partially caved in and one wall was leaning dangerously. Nature was reclaiming it, with vines and moss covering much of the exterior. As I got closer, I noticed deep gouges in the wood of the doorframe, claw marks far larger than any animal I'd ever encountered. I hesitated at the threshold, my hand hovering over the rusted doorknob. Did I really want to go inside? What if the hooded man was still using this place? Or worse, what if the creature people had been talking about was real, and this was its lair? But I'd come too far to turn back now. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open. The interior of the cabin was a mess of broken furniture and debris. Dust motes danced in the beams of light filtering through the holes in the roof. I stepped carefully, mindful of the rotting floorboards. In one corner, I saw what looked like a makeshift bed, a pile of old blankets and clothes. Nearby was a stack of canned food, some opened recently. As I explored further, something caught my eye. Pinned to one wall was a large map of the forest, covered in markings and notes. I moved closer to examine it, my flashlight illuminating the faded paper. Red X's marked various locations throughout the forest, with dates scribbled next to them. Some of the dates corresponded with the missing hikers I'd heard about. A chill ran down my spine as I realized what I might be looking at. A record of attacks or abductions. But why? What was the purpose behind all this? Suddenly, a noise outside made me freeze. It sounded like heavy footsteps moving slowly around the cabin. My heart pounded in my chest as I quickly switched off my flashlight and pressed myself against the wall next to the window. The footsteps stopped right outside. Through a crack in the boarded-up window, I could make out a large, dark shape. It was hunched over, much taller and broader than any man I'd ever seen. As it turned its head, I caught a glimpse of glowing eyes and a muzzle full of sharp teeth. I held my breath, terrified that even the slightest sound would give me away. The creature sniffed the air, its nostrils flaring. For a moment I was sure it had detected my presence. But then, to my immense relief, it moved away, its heavy footsteps fading into the forest. I waited several minutes before daring to move, my legs shaky from the adrenaline. What I had just seen defied explanation. It wasn't human, but it wasn't any animal I recognized either. Was this the creature people had been talking about? And if so, what was its connection to the hooded man? I knew I needed to get out of there fast, but I couldn't leave empty-handed. Quickly, I used my phone to take pictures of the map and the rest of the cabin's interior. Then, moving as quietly as I could, I made my way back outside. The forest seemed different now, more menacing. Every shadow could be hiding that creature, waiting to pounce. I moved as quickly as I dared back towards the main trail, constantly looking over my shoulder. It was late afternoon by the time I made it back to my RV. I locked the doors and sat there for a long time, trying to process what I had seen. The creature in the woods, the map in the cabin, the missing hikers, it all pointed to something sinister happening in these forests. But what could I do about it? Who would believe me if I told them? As night fell, I made a decision. I couldn't just walk away from this, not when people's lives might be in danger. I needed to gather more evidence to understand what was really going on. But I also knew I couldn't do this alone. I needed help. The next morning, I drove to the nearest town with a reliable internet connection. I spent hours researching, looking for any information about similar sightings or incidents in other forests. To my surprise, I found several accounts from across the country. Stories of hikers encountering large, unknown creatures, of strange disappearances in national parks. One name kept coming up in my research: Dr. Laura Chen, a cryptozoologist who specialized in investigating reports of unknown animals. She had written several papers on the possibility of undiscovered large primates in North American forests. If anyone would take my story seriously, it would be her. It took some doing, but I managed to get in touch with Dr. Chen. At first, she was skeptical of my story, but when I sent her the photos I'd taken in the cabin, her tone changed. She agreed to meet me in person to discuss what I'd seen. 2 days later, I found myself sitting across from Dr. Chen in a small cafe in Pittsburgh. She was younger than I expected, probably in her early 40s, with a sharp, intelligent gaze that seemed to take in every detail. "Mr. Martin," she said, after I'd recounted my experiences, "what you're describing is fascinating. If what you saw is real, it could be the discovery of the century." "If it's real," I echoed, a bit offended. "I know what I saw, Dr. Chen." She held up a hand placatingly. "I believe that you believe what you saw, but in my line of work I've learned to be cautious. Eyewitness accounts can be unreliable, especially in high-stress situations. That said, the evidence you've gathered, the photos, the map, those are compelling. I'd like to investigate further." I felt a mix of relief and apprehension. On one hand, I was glad to have someone take me seriously. On the other, the thought of going back into those woods terrified me. But I knew I had to see this through. "What's our next step?" I asked. Dr. Chen leaned forward, her eyes bright with excitement. "We go back to the forest. We set up cameras, gather physical evidence. If this creature is real, we need to document it properly, but we need to be careful. Whatever this is, it's dangerous. We can't risk alerting it to our presence." Over the next few weeks, Dr. Chen and I made several trips into the Allegheny National Forest. We set up motion-activated cameras near the old cabin and in other areas where sightings had been reported. We collected hair samples, made plaster casts of strange footprints we found. All the while, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Our breakthrough came on a cold, misty morning about a month into our investigation. We were checking the cameras when we heard a loud crash in the distance, followed by an inhuman roar that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Dr. Chen and I exchanged a look of excitement and fear. Without a word, we began moving towards the sound, our cameras at the ready. As we crept through the underbrush, the mist seemed to thicken, reducing visibility to just a few yards. Suddenly, a massive shape burst out of the mist right in front of us. It was the creature I had seen at the cabin, but in the daylight I could see it more clearly. It stood at least 8 feet tall, covered in dark, matted fur. Its face was a nightmarish blend of ape and something almost human, with intelligent eyes that seemed to glow with an inner light. For a moment, time seemed to stand still as the three of us, Dr. Chen, myself, and this impossible creature, stared at each other. Then, with another ear-splitting roar, it turned and vanished back into the mist. Dr. Chen and I stood there, stunned into silence. Finally, she turned to me, her face pale but her eyes shining. "Did you get that on camera?" she asked breathlessly. I nodded, my hand shaking as I checked the camera. The encounter had lasted only seconds, but it was there, captured in high definition, proof that the creature was real. But our elation was short-lived. As we turned to head back to our camp, we found our path blocked by a familiar figure, the hooded man. He stood there silently, his face still hidden in shadow, a hunting rifle cradled in his arms. "You shouldn't have come back," he said, his voice low and menacing. "This doesn't concern you." "Who are you?" I demanded. "What's going on here?" The man was silent for a long moment. Then slowly he reached up and pushed back his hood. I gasped as I recognized his face. It was Frank, the man I had helped escape that night at the campground. But he looked different now, older, harder, with a wild look in his eyes. "My name isn't Frank," he said. "It's William Blackwood. My family has been protecting these forests and its secrets for generations. That creature you saw? It's ancient, powerful. Some call it a guardian spirit, others a monster. But it's part of these woods, part of the balance of nature here. And now, because of your meddling, that balance is threatened." Dr. Chen stepped forward, her scientific curiosity overcoming her fear. "But don't you see, this is an incredible discovery. We could learn so much." William cut her off with a harsh laugh. "Learn? You think you can study it like some animal in a zoo? This creature has been here since before humans walked these lands. It's not meant to be understood by our limited minds. It's meant to be respected, feared, left alone." I could see the fanaticism in his eyes, the absolute conviction in his words. This man truly believed he was protecting something greater than himself. "But at what cost?" "The missing hikers," I said, realization dawning. "Was that you, or it?" William's face hardened. "Sometimes sacrifices must be made to maintain the balance, to keep people away, to feed the guardian. It's not pretty, but it's necessary." I felt sick to my stomach. This man had been luring innocent people to their deaths, all in service of some misguided belief in a forest spirit. "You're insane," I said. "We have to tell the authorities." William raised his rifle. "I can't let you do that. I'm sorry, but you've seen too much. The secret must be protected at any cost." Time seemed to slow down. I saw William's finger tightening on the trigger. I heard Dr. Chen's sharp intake of breath beside me. And then from behind William came a deafening roar. The creature burst out of the mist, moving faster than something that size had any right to. Before William could react, it was upon him. There was a sickening crunch, a cut-off scream, and then silence. Dr. Chen and I stood frozen in horror as the creature turned towards us. Its muzzle was stained with blood, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly intelligence. For a long moment it regarded us silently. Then to my amazement it spoke. Its voice was deep, resonant, like the rumble of distant thunder. "You have seen, you have learned, now you must choose. Speak of this, and the balance will be forever broken. Keep our secret, and the forest will thrive." With that, it turned and loped off into the mist, leaving us alone with the broken body of William Blackwood. Dr. Chen and I looked at each other, shocked beyond words. We had come seeking answers, but now we were left with an impossible choice. Reveal the truth and risk destroying something ancient and powerful, or keep the secret and live with the knowledge of what was happening in these woods. In the end, we chose silence. We buried William's body deep in the forest and destroyed all the evidence we had gathered. The world wasn't ready for this truth, we decided. Maybe it never would be. I still think about that day often, even now, years later. Sometimes, when the wind blows just right, I think I can hear a distant roar echoing through the trees, and I wonder if we made the right choice. But one thing I know for certain, there are secrets in this world, ancient and powerful, that are better left undiscovered. And the next time you find yourself in a dark, quiet forest, remember this: you are not alone, and you are not at the top of the food chain. The woods are watching, always watching. My name is Arthur Scott, and I am 77 years old. What I'm about to tell you happened to me on October 7th, 1995. I had decided to take my RV out for a weekend camping trip to the Blackwater Falls State Park in West Virginia. It wasn't the first time I'd been there. I loved the peace and quiet the place offered. Being a teacher, I relished these moments away from the hustle of the school and the noise of the town. I set off early on Friday morning with my dog Max riding shotgun. Max was a loyal companion, a big German shepherd who was as gentle as a lamb but could look intimidating when he needed to. The drive to the park was uneventful, winding through the beautiful Appalachian countryside. The leaves were just starting to turn, painting the landscape in vibrant shades of red, orange, and gold. We got to the park around noon, found a good spot by the river, and set up camp. The campground was relatively empty, which wasn't unusual for this time of year. Most families had already taken their summer vacations, and the weather was starting to cool off. I liked it this way. Fewer people meant more tranquility. I spent the afternoon setting up the campsite, arranging the chairs, and preparing the fire pit. Max explored the surrounding area, his tail wagging excitedly as he sniffed every tree and bush within reach. As I worked, I couldn't help but feel a sense of contentment wash over me. This was what I needed, a break from the daily grind, a chance to reconnect with nature. As evening approached, I decided to take a walk along the river. The water was low this time of year, exposing smooth river rocks along the banks. I picked my way carefully along the shore, enjoying the sound of the rushing water and the crisp autumn air. Max bounded ahead, splashing in the shallows and chasing after the occasional fish. When we returned to the campsite, I started a fire and cooked a simple dinner of beans and hot dogs. Max sat patiently by my side, his eyes never leaving the food. I chuckled and tossed him a hot dog, which he caught midair with impressive agility for his size. After dinner, I sat by the fire reading a book I'd brought along, a historical novel about the Civil War. The crackling of the fire and the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze created a perfect backdrop for reading. Max lay at my feet, occasionally lifting his head to scan the darkening woods around us. It was around sunset when I noticed the first odd thing. Max, usually so full of energy, was pacing nervously by the edge of the woods. His ears were pricked and he was making these low whimpering sounds. I called him back and he came, but he kept looking back towards the trees. He just sat down next to me, still staring at the tree line. I tried to see what had caught his attention, but the gathering darkness made it difficult to make out anything beyond the first few rows of trees. "What is it, boy?" I asked, but Max just whined in response. I chalked it up to wildlife. Maybe he'd caught the scent of a deer or a raccoon. As night fell, the forest came alive with the sounds of nocturnal creatures. Owls hooted in the distance, and I could hear the occasional rustle in the underbrush, probably small animals foraging for food. Despite the familiar sounds, there was an undercurrent of tension that I couldn't quite shake. I decided to turn in early, hoping to get an early start the next day for some hiking. I secured the campsite, making sure all the food was properly stored to avoid attracting bears, and retreated to the RV with Max. He seemed reluctant to enter, lingering by the door and looking back at the woods. I had to coax him inside with a treat. That night I had trouble sleeping. The RV creaked and groaned with every gust of wind, and outside the forest seemed unusually active. I could hear branches snapping and leaves rustling, as if something large was moving through the undergrowth. Max was restless too, pacing back and forth in the small confines of the RV. I must have dozed off eventually because I woke with a start in the early hours of the morning. The RV was silent, and even the forest outside seemed to have gone quiet. Too quiet. I sat up, straining my ears for any sound. That's when I heard it, a low guttural growl coming from right outside the RV. My heart began to race. I fumbled for the flashlight I kept by the bed, my hands shaking slightly. Max was standing by the door, his hackles raised and a low growl rumbling in his chest. I whispered for him to be quiet, not wanting to provoke whatever was out there. Slowly I made my way to the window and peered out. The campsite was bathed in pale moonlight, casting long shadows across the ground. At first I didn't see anything out of the ordinary. Then a movement caught my eye. Something large and dark was moving at the edge of the clearing, just beyond the reach of the moonlight. I held my breath, watching as the shape moved with an unnatural fluidity. It was too big to be a deer, and its movements were too deliberate for a bear. As it passed between two trees, the moonlight illuminated it for just a moment. What I saw made my blood run cold. It was vaguely humanoid in shape, but much larger than any man I'd ever seen. Its body was covered in dark matted fur, and its limbs were long and distorted. But it was the eyes that truly terrified me. Two glowing red orbs that seemed to pierce right through me. I stumbled back from the window, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. Max was still growling, his eyes fixed on the door. I wanted to run, to drive away as fast as I could, but fear had paralyzed me. All I could do was sit there in the darkness, praying that whatever was out there wouldn't try to get in. The rest of the night passed in a haze of fear and vigilance. Every sound, every shadow made me jump. By the time dawn broke, I was exhausted but too keyed up to sleep. As soon as it was light enough, I peered out the window again. The campsite looked normal in the early morning light, but something felt off. I cautiously stepped out of the RV, Max close at my heels. That's when I noticed the tracks. Large, inhuman footprints circled the RV, coming to a stop right outside the window where I'd seen the creature. The prints were unlike anything I'd ever seen, too large for a bear, with long claw-like impressions at the end of each toe. My first instinct was to leave immediately, but as I turned to go back into the RV, I noticed something that made my heart sink. All 4 tires were flat, punctured by what looked like large claw marks. We were stranded. I tried to stay calm, running through my options. The ranger station was about 5 miles away. I could hike there and get help, but the thought of walking through those woods with that thing still out there filled me with dread. Still, it seemed like the only viable option. I packed a small bag with some water, food, and a first aid kit. I also grabbed a hunting knife I kept in the RV for emergencies. It wasn't much, but it made me feel a little safer. I left a note on the RV in case anyone came by, explaining the situation and where I was headed. As Max and I set off towards the ranger station, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The forest, which had always seemed so peaceful before, now felt oppressive and threatening. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves made me flinch. We'd been walking for about an hour when Max suddenly stopped, his ears perked forward. I followed his gaze and saw something that made my stomach churn. About 50 yards ahead, a deer carcass lay strewn across the path. It had been torn apart, its innards spread over a large area. This was no ordinary predator kill. It looked like something had been playing with its food. I wanted to turn back, but I knew our only hope was to reach the ranger station. We skirted around the carcass, giving it a wide berth. As we passed, I couldn't help but notice the same large claw-like tracks in the soft earth around the deer. The next few hours were some of the most tense of my life. We pushed on through the forest, the sense of being watched growing stronger with each step. Twice I thought I saw something moving in the trees, just at the edge of my vision. But when I turned to look, there was nothing there. It was late afternoon by the time we finally reached the ranger station. My relief at seeing the building quickly turned to apprehension as we got closer. The place looked deserted. The door was hanging open, swinging slightly in the breeze. "Hello?" I called out as we approached. There was no answer. Max whined softly, pressing closer to my leg. I took a deep breath and stepped inside. The interior of the station was a mess. Papers were strewn everywhere, chairs overturned. It looked like someone had left in a hurry or been forced to leave. I moved further into the building, looking for any sign of the Rangers or a working phone. In the back office, I found a radio. My hands shook as I picked up the microphone and tried to call for help. There was nothing but static. I fiddled with the dials, desperately trying to get a signal, but it was no use. We were cut off. As the realization of our situation sank in, I heard Max start to growl. I turned to see him standing in the doorway, his hackles raised, staring out into the gathering darkness. That's when I heard it, the same low, guttural growl I'd heard outside the RV. I grabbed the hunting knife from my bag and moved to the window. At first I saw nothing but the deepening shadows of the forest. Then movement caught my eye. Something was out there, circling the station. I caught glimpses of it as it moved, the same large dark shape I'd seen the night before. Fear gripped me, but I knew I had to act. I quickly closed and locked the door, then started pushing furniture against it to create a barricade. Max helped in his own way, dragging a chair by its leg to add to the pile. As night fell, the noises outside grew louder. I could hear something scratching at the walls, testing for weaknesses. Max and I huddled in the back office, away from the windows. I clutched the hunting knife in one hand and a heavy flashlight in the other, ready to defend ourselves if necessary. Hours passed, each one feeling like an eternity. The scratching and growling continued, punctuated by occasional loud thumps, as if something was throwing itself against the walls. I prayed that the old building would hold. It was around midnight when things escalated. There was a loud crash from the front of the building. The creature had broken through. I could hear it moving inside the station now, its claws clicking on the linoleum floor. Max was trembling beside me, but he stood his ground, facing the office door. I raised the knife, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. The footsteps grew closer, slow and deliberate. Then silence. For a long moment, nothing moved. I held my breath, straining to hear any sound. Suddenly, the office door exploded inward. In the beam of my flashlight, I saw it clearly for the first time. The creature was enormous, at least 8 feet tall, with a body covered in dark, matted fur. Its face was a nightmarish blend of human and animal features, with a protruding snout filled with sharp teeth. But it was the eyes that transfixed me, glowing red orbs filled with an intelligence and malevolence that was all too human. For a split second, we stared at each other. Then it lunged. I swung the knife wildly, feeling it connect with something solid. The creature roared in pain and fury. Max launched himself at it, latching onto its arm with his powerful jaws. In the chaos that followed, I somehow managed to slip past the creature and out of the office. I ran for the front door, Max right behind me. We burst out into the cool night air and kept running, not daring to look back. I don't know how long we ran. It felt like hours. Every sound behind us spurred us to greater speed. Finally, exhausted and gasping for breath, we stumbled onto a road. In the distance, I saw headlights approaching. I flagged down the car, practically throwing myself in front of it. The driver, a middle-aged man, looked at me like I was crazy as I babbled out my story. But seeing my terrified state and the blood on Max's muzzle, he agreed to take us to the nearest town. At the local police station, I recounted my experience. The officers listened politely, but I could see the skepticism in their eyes. They assured me they would send a team to investigate the campsite and the ranger station, but I could tell they didn't really believe me. Over the next few days, as Max and I recovered in a local motel, I followed the investigation closely. The police found the ranger station in disarray, just as I'd described. They also found large, unidentified animal tracks around my campsite and the slashed tires on my RV. But there was no sign of the creature itself. The official report chalked it up to a bear attack, despite my protests that what I'd seen was no bear. The rangers who had been on duty were found safe. They'd been called away on an emergency in another part of the park and had radio issues, which explained why I couldn't contact anyone. In the weeks that followed, I tried to put the experience behind me, but I couldn't forget what I'd seen. I did some research and found similar stories from people who'd encountered something like it in the area. They called it the Wendigo, a creature from Native American folklore known for its insatiable hunger and ability to mimic human voices. I don't know if what I saw was really a Wendigo or something else entirely. All I know is that it's out there and it's dangerous. I never went back to Blackwater Falls and I don't go camping alone anymore. Max recovered from his injuries, but he was never quite the same after that night. He became more protective, more alert to dangers I couldn't perceive. Sometimes late at night I hear scratching at my window, and I wonder if it followed me home. In those moments I'm grateful for Max's steady presence beside me, always vigilant, always ready to face whatever might be lurking in the shadows. I've told this story many times over the years, to friends, family, and occasionally to wide-eyed students who catch me in a reflective mood. Some believe me, some don't. But I know what I saw that night in Blackwater Falls, and I know that there are things out there in the dark woods that defy explanation, things that remind us that we are not always at the top of the food chain. So if you ever find yourself camping in those remote woods, and you hear something moving in the darkness, something that sounds almost human but not quite, don't investigate. Don't try to be brave. Just run. Run as fast and as far as you can. Because some mysteries are better left unsolved and some creatures are better left unseen. My name is Barry Cooper, and I am 70 years old. What I'm about to tell you happened to me on August 17th, 1998. Back then, I was just an ordinary guy working a 9-to-5 job in Chicago. There was nothing special about me, really. I liked to spend my weekends out in nature, camping and getting away from the hustle and bustle of city life. This particular time, I decided to venture out to a place called Medicine Bow National Forest in Wyoming. It was quite a long drive, but I was up for the adventure. I hit the road in my old RV, which I had affectionately named Betsy. Betsy had been with me through thick and thin, rain, snow, and sunshine. She wasn't the prettiest vehicle out there, but she got the job done. I left Chicago early on a Friday morning with a thermos full of coffee and a playlist of classic rock to keep me company. The drive was long, but I enjoyed watching the landscape change as I headed west. The flat prairies of Illinois gave way to the rolling hills of Iowa, then the rugged terrain of Nebraska, and finally the majestic mountains of Wyoming. By the time I reached the forest, it was late afternoon. The place was as beautiful as I'd imagined, maybe even more so. Tall pines stretched towards the sky, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. The air was crisp and clean, filled with the scent of pine and wild herbs. I found a secluded spot by a small lake to set up camp. There were no other campers in sight, which was just the way I liked it. I parked Betsy, stretching my legs after the long drive. My joints creaked a bit, a reminder that I wasn't as young as I used to be. But the fresh air and the excitement of being in nature made me feel reinvigorated. I set about setting up my little campsite, unfolding my camp chair and gathering wood for a fire. That first night was peaceful. I cooked some canned beans over the campfire, watching as the sun slowly sank behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. The lake mirrored the colorful sky, creating a breathtaking scene. As darkness fell, the stars came out in full force. Away from the city lights, the night sky was a spectacle, with countless stars twinkling above. I sat there for a while, sipping on a beer and marveling at the beauty of it all. When I finally turned in for the night, the sounds of the forest lulled me to sleep. The gentle lapping of the lake water against the shore, the rustle of leaves in the breeze, and the occasional hoot of an owl created a soothing natural symphony. I slept like a baby, feeling more relaxed than I had in months. The next morning I woke up with the sun. After a quick breakfast of instant oatmeal and coffee, I decided to go for a hike. I packed a small bag with some water, trail mix, a couple of sandwiches, and my trusty Swiss Army knife. I also grabbed my old Kodak camera, hoping to capture some of the beautiful scenery. I set off into the woods, following a trail that seemed to be used mostly by animals. The forest was alive with activity. Squirrels chattered in the trees, birds sang their morning songs, and occasionally I'd catch a glimpse of a rabbit darting through the underbrush. I took my time, stopping often to admire the wildflowers that dotted the forest floor, or to watch a butterfly flit from bloom to bloom. As I hiked deeper into the forest, the trees grew denser, and the light took on a green, filtered quality. It was cooler here, and the air felt damper. I came across a small clearing where a fallen log provided a perfect spot for a rest. I sat down, munching on my trail mix and taking in the peacefulness of my surroundings. It was then that I noticed something odd. There were footprints in the soft earth near the log. They were large prints, much bigger than my own, and they didn't look like they belonged to any animal I knew. They were almost human-like, but too big and too spaced out. I leaned in for a closer look, feeling a slight chill despite the warm day. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just a very large person who had passed through recently, or perhaps it was some kind of optical illusion caused by rain or wind. But deep down, something felt off about those prints. They seemed unnatural. I shook off the uneasy feeling and continued my hike, but I couldn't help noticing that the forest seemed quieter now. The bird songs had faded, and even the rustling of small animals in the underbrush had ceased. It was as if the whole forest was holding its breath. As the sun started to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows through the trees, I realized I should head back to camp. I turned around, following the same path I had taken earlier. But something felt different. The friendly, welcoming forest of the morning now seemed oppressive and watchful. Every shadow seemed to hide something, and every rustle of leaves made me jump. I picked up my pace, eager to get back to the safety of Betsy before dark. The growing darkness played tricks on my eyes. More than once I thought I saw movement out of the corner of my eye, only to turn and find nothing there. When I finally reached my campsite, I noticed something was off. My campfire, which I had completely extinguished before leaving, looked like it had been tampered with. The ashes were scattered, and there were sticks arranged in a strange pattern around it. It wasn't anything I recognized, certainly not something I had done. I felt a chill run down my spine. Had someone been here while I was gone, or was it just some local kids playing a prank? I tried to shake off the unease and went about making dinner, but I couldn't help glancing around as I cooked, half expecting to see someone watching me from the trees. As night fell, the forest came alive with sounds, but they weren't the peaceful noises of the previous evening. These sounds were different, deeper, more ominous. The hoot of an owl sounded more like a warning than a greeting. The rustle in the bushes seemed too heavy to be a small animal. That night, sleep didn't come easy. Every little noise outside seemed amplified in the stillness of the night. I tossed and turned, unable to shake the feeling that something was out there, watching and waiting. Around midnight, I heard something that made my blood run cold. It was a low, rumbling sound, almost like a growl, but deeper and more resonant than any animal I'd ever heard. I sat up in my bed, heart pounding, and listened. The sound came again, closer this time. I grabbed my flashlight and knife, trying to steady my shaking hands. I didn't have a gun, never felt the need for one before. Now I was regretting that decision. I crept to the window and shone the flashlight outside. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the trees and the empty campsite. Then I saw it, a figure standing at the edge of the clearing, just beyond the reach of my flashlight. It was tall, much taller than any person I'd ever seen, with broad shoulders and long limbs. The light reflected off its eyes, which glowed an eerie yellow. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling. The figure didn't move, just stood there, watching. I took a step back, my mind racing. Was it some kind of animal? A bear, maybe? But no, it didn't move like any bear I'd ever seen. I decided to stay inside and lock the doors, hoping it would go away. I spent the rest of the night sitting in the driver's seat, clutching my knife and listening to the sounds outside. The growling continued intermittently, sometimes closer, sometimes farther away. It was as if whatever was out there was circling my RV, testing for weaknesses. Eventually, the growling stopped, and I must have dozed off from sheer exhaustion. When I woke up, the sun was already high in the sky. I cautiously stepped outside, looking for any sign of the creature. There were more footprints around the camp, larger and more defined than the ones I'd seen on the trail. They circled the RV just as I'd imagined during the night. I knew I couldn't stay there any longer. Whatever was out there, it wasn't natural and it wasn't friendly. I started packing up my things, my hands shaking as I tried to work quickly. As I was securing everything in the RV, I heard a noise behind me. I spun around, heart in my throat, half expecting to see the creature from the night before. Instead, I saw a man walking towards me. He was dressed in old, tattered clothes, his face weathered and lined. He had a rifle slung over his shoulder. "Morning," he said, his voice gruff. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Something like that," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Who are you?" "Name's Hank," he said. "I live in a cabin a few miles from here. Saw your RV and thought I'd come check it out. Not many folks come this way." I nodded, grateful for the company of another human being. "Raymond," I introduced myself. I had a strange night." Hank raised an eyebrow. "Strange how?" I told him about the footprints and the growling, about the figure I'd seen in the dark. He listened, his expression growing more serious with each word. "You're lucky you're still in one piece," he said when I finished. "There's something out here, something not quite natural. Folks around here call it the Wendigo." "The Wendigo?" I repeated, the name sending a shiver through me. "What is it?" "Some kind of creature, half man, half beast," Hank explained. "It's been around these parts for generations. Most people don't believe in it, but I've seen things, heard things." He trailed off, looking into the distance. "Best thing you can do is get out of here and don't come back." I didn't need any more convincing. I thanked Hank and finished packing up. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The trees seemed to close in around me, and the shadows grew longer. It was a relief when I finally hit the main road and left the forest behind. Back in Chicago, life went on as usual, but I couldn't forget what had happened. I told a few friends, but they just laughed it off, saying I must have imagined it. Maybe they were right, but deep down, I knew what I'd seen was real. I never went back to Medicine Bow. The memory of that night still haunts me. The sight of those glowing eyes and the sound of that inhuman growl. I don't know what it was, and I hope I never find out. A few months later, I heard about a hiker who went missing in that same forest. The search parties found no trace of him, just his abandoned campsite and those same strange footprints. I couldn't help but wonder if he had encountered the same creature. I suppose we'll never know for sure. All I can do is share my story and hope that others take it seriously. There are things out there in the wilderness that defy explanation, things that we may never understand. For me, the forest is no longer a place of peace and solitude. It's a place of shadows and whispers, a place where something ancient and malevolent still roams. The name Hank mentioned, the Wendigo, stuck with me. It's a name that carries a weight, a sense of dread. It's not just a name, it's a warning. So if you ever find yourself in the deep woods, far from civilization, keep your eyes open and your wits about you. You never know what might be watching from the darkness. And if you hear a deep, inhuman growl in the night, don't investigate. Run. Run as fast and as far as you can. That's my story. A cautionary tale from an old camper who learned the hard way that some legends are rooted in truth. If you ever hear the name Wendigo, remember my words and steer clear. Some mysteries are better left unsolved, some creatures better left unseen. As I sit here now, years later, I can still feel the chill of that night. The memory hasn't faded, and I doubt it ever will. Sometimes on quiet nights, I think I can hear that growl again, carried on the wind. And I wonder, not for the first time, if what I encountered in those woods is still out there, waiting for its next victim. I've never told this story in full before, and I probably never will again. But I hope that by sharing it, I might save someone else from experiencing what I did. The wilderness is beautiful, but it's also dangerous, and sometimes the greatest dangers are the ones we can't explain. So the next time you're planning a camping trip, remember my story. Enjoy nature, but respect it too. And always, always be aware of your surroundings, because you never know what might be lurking just beyond the light of your campfire. My name is Edward King, and I'm 67 years old. This is the story of what happened to me on June 23, 1998, during my annual solo camping trip. It was supposed to be a break from the city grind, a chance to escape the constant noise of my construction business and find some peace in nature. Little did I know that this trip would change my life forever. I had chosen a lesser-known spot near the Black Hills in South Dakota for my getaway. An old friend had told me about it, describing it as perfect for those seeking true solitude. No cell service, no people, just me in the wild. It sounded like paradise to a man who'd spent the better part of his life surrounded by the clamor of jackhammers and shouting foremen. The drive was long, but I didn't mind. My trusty old RV, which I'd retrofitted myself with a small kitchenette and a cozy sleeping area, hummed along the highway. I passed through small towns, the kind where everyone knows everyone else's business. In one of these towns, I stopped to stock up on supplies. I grabbed some extra food, a new flashlight, and a couple of cheap novels to keep me entertained during the quiet evenings. By the time I reached the campsite, it was late afternoon. The sun was dipping low, casting long shadows through the thick pine forest that surrounded the area. I found a clearing that overlooked a small stream and parked the RV. It was idyllic. The babbling of the water over rocks, the chirping of birds, and the rustle of leaves in the breeze created a symphony of nature that instantly soothed my nerves. I set up a small campfire, cooked myself a simple dinner of beans and sausages, and settled in to read one of the novels I'd bought. The fire crackled and popped, sending sparks dancing into the darkening sky. As night fell, the forest came alive with a different kind of music, the hooting of owls, the chirping of crickets, and the occasional rustle in the underbrush. It was around midnight when I first heard the noise. At first it was faint, almost imperceptible over the crackle of the dying fire and the sounds of the night. A sort of scratching, rustling sound like something moving through the underbrush. I figured it was just a raccoon or some other small critter, so I didn't pay it much mind. I finished my book and headed to bed, the noise still tickling the edge of my awareness. I woke up in the middle of the night to a loud thump against the side of the RV. My heart pounded as I lay there listening. There it was again, a heavy, deliberate sound, like something or someone was hitting the RV. I grabbed my flashlight and a large wrench, the closest thing I had to a weapon. I crept to the window and shined the light outside. Nothing, just the trees and the stream, now a shadowy blur in the moonlight. I decided to step outside, thinking it might be a fallen branch or maybe a deer that had stumbled into the RV. As I opened the door, the night air hit me, cool and sharp. I scanned the area with my flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness. That's when I saw it, a large dark shape moving just beyond the reach of the light. It was big, bigger than any animal I'd ever seen in these parts. I froze, my mind racing through possibilities. A bear? No, it moved too quickly, too fluidly. "Hello?" I called out, feeling foolish the moment the word left my mouth. There was no response, just the sound of the stream and the rustling of leaves. I backed up slowly, my heart hammering in my chest, and retreated into the RV, locking the door behind me. Sleep was out of the question. I sat there, wrench in hand, listening. But whatever it was, it didn't make any more noise. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the trees, I ventured outside again. What I found made my blood run cold. The side of the RV was scratched up, deep gouges in the metal that looked like they'd been made by enormous claws. I shook my head, trying to rationalize it. Maybe it was a bear after all, though I'd never heard of one behaving like this. I decided to stay put, thinking it might just have been a fluke, a curious animal passing through. The day passed uneventfully. I hiked around the area, took some pictures, even tried my hand at fishing in the stream, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The forest, which had seemed so welcoming just yesterday, now felt oppressive, the trees closing in around me. I chalked it up to nerves and decided to turn in early, hoping a good night's sleep would set me straight. It was around 2 a.m. when I woke up to the sound of footsteps outside the RV. They were heavy, deliberate, and they circled the vehicle slowly. My breath caught in my throat. I grabbed the wrench again and stood by the door, listening. The footsteps stopped, and there was a long, eerie silence. Then a low scraping sound like claws being dragged across metal. I felt a chill run down my spine. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice cracking. No response. I didn't dare open the door this time. Instead, I peered through the small window. I couldn't see anything, just darkness and the faint outline of trees. The scraping continued, methodical and terrifying. I spent the rest of the night huddled in a corner, the wrench clutched tightly in my hand. As dawn broke, the noises stopped, replaced by the sounds of morning birds and the babbling stream. I stepped outside, my legs shaky, and inspected the damage. More scratches, deeper this time, and what looked like bite marks on the edge of the door. That was it. I decided to leave. I packed up my things, securing everything inside the RV, and started the engine. But the RV wouldn't start. I tried again and again, but nothing. It was dead. I felt a wave of panic wash over me. I was miles from the nearest town with no cell service and no way to call for help. I spent the day trying to fix the engine, but I'm no mechanic. By afternoon, I realized I wasn't going to get it running on my own. I'd have to hike out to the nearest town. I packed a bag with some essentials, water, food, flashlight, and my wrench, and started walking. The trail was overgrown and rarely used, but I'd marked it on my map. The sun was setting as I walked, casting long shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. I kept hearing noises behind me, twigs snapping, leaves rustling. I turned around several times but saw nothing. I picked up the pace, my heart pounding in my chest. That's when I saw the first body. It was an old man, his clothes tattered and covered in dirt and blood. His eyes were wide open, staring blankly at the sky. I knelt down, feeling for a pulse, but he was cold. Dead for at least a day, maybe more. I felt sick, my stomach churning. What the hell was going on? I didn't have time to think. I heard a noise behind me, a low guttural sound that made my blood run cold. I turned slowly, and there it was, the creature. It was huge, towering over me, covered in matted fur. Its eyes glowed in the dim light, and its teeth, sharp and menacing, gleamed as it opened its mouth. I ran. I didn't look back, didn't think, just ran as fast as I could. I could hear it behind me, crashing through the underbrush, getting closer. My lungs burned, my legs felt like they were on fire, but I kept going. I burst out of the trees into a small clearing and saw a cabin. I sprinted towards it, hoping against hope that someone was inside. I reached the door and pounded on it, screaming for help. The door opened and an old woman stood there, her eyes wide with shock. She pulled me inside and slammed the door shut, bolting it quickly. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice trembling. "There's something out there," I gasped, trying to catch my breath. "It killed someone. It's after me." She nodded grimly and handed me a shotgun. "Stay here. Don't let it in." I took the gun, my hands shaking. The creature was outside, circling the cabin. We could hear it, the heavy footsteps, the scratching at the walls. The old woman and I stood back to back, watching the doors and windows, waiting. It was hours before the noises stopped. The sun was starting to rise, and the creature seemed to retreat with the daylight. The old woman, whose name I learned was Agnes, told me she'd seen the creature before, years ago. It had taken her husband and son, leaving her alone in this cabin. "It's been here for as long as anyone can remember," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Some say it's a guardian spirit, others think it's a demon. All I know is it's dangerous." I stayed with Agnes for a few more days, helping her reinforce the cabin and making sure the creature didn't come back. When I finally felt it was safe to leave, she gave me directions to the nearest town, about a day's walk away. I made it to the town and called for help. The authorities went back to the campsite, but there was no sign of the creature. They found the bodies, though, 3 more in various stages of decomposition. All of them had the same claw marks and bite wounds. I never went back to that spot, and I don't camp alone anymore. The memory of that night still haunts me. The sound of those footsteps, the sight of those glowing eyes. I don't know what that creature really was, but I know it's still out there, somewhere in the Black Hills, waiting for its next victim. In the years since that fateful camping trip, I've done a lot of research. I've talked to local historians, Native American elders, and even a few cryptozoologists. Everyone has a different theory about what the creature might be, but no one has any concrete answers. Some of the Native American elders spoke of an ancient legend, a creature they called the Shadow Walker. According to their stories, it was a spirit that protected the sacred lands of the Black Hills, punishing those who disrespected nature. But the brutality I witnessed seemed at odds with the idea of a protective spirit. Others suggested it might be some kind of undiscovered species, a relic from prehistoric times that had somehow survived in the isolated wilderness of the Black Hills. The cryptozoologists were particularly excited by this theory, drawing comparisons to creatures like Bigfoot or the Yeti. But none of these explanations could fully account for what I had experienced. The intelligence I had sensed in those glowing eyes, the deliberate way it had stalked me. It seemed too calculated, too human-like to be a mere animal. I've spent countless nights lying awake, replaying the events in my mind, trying to make sense of it all. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined the whole thing, if the stress of my job and the isolation of the camping trip had caused some kind of mental break. But then I remember the claw marks on my RV, the bodies in the forest, and I know it was all too real. The experience changed me in ways I'm still trying to understand. I sold my construction business not long after I returned from that trip. The noise and chaos of the city, which I had once found invigorating, now felt oppressive and overwhelming. I moved to a small town seeking the peace I had once found in nature, but now struggled to recapture. I've tried to move on with my life, to put the events of that night behind me, but every now and then something will trigger a memory, the crack of a twig in the woods behind my house, a shadow moving at the edge of my vision, the howl of a distant animal that sounds just a little too human. And in those moments I'm right back there in the Black Hills, running for my life, the creature's hot breath on the back of my neck. In those moments, I remember the words Agnes told me before I left her cabin. It's always out there, waiting, and it never forgets a scent. I've often wondered about Agnes in the years since. Did she stay in that cabin alone with her memories and her fear? Or did she finally leave, unable to bear the weight of her losses and the constant threat lurking in the forest? I've thought about going back, just to check on her, but the fear always holds me back. Sometimes late at night when the wind is howling and the shadows seem to dance on my walls, I find myself reaching for the phone, ready to call the authorities and tell them everything. But what would I say? That there's a monster in the Black Hills? That it's killed people and is still out there? They'd think I was crazy. Hell, sometimes I think I'm crazy. But then I remember the bodies, the claw marks, the glowing eyes in the darkness. I remember the fear in Agnes's voice as she told me about losing her family. And I know, deep in my bones, that it's all real. I've tried to warn people in my own subtle ways. When I overhear someone at the local diner talking about camping in the Black Hills, I'll casually mention that I've heard it can be dangerous out there. Most people brush it off. They think I'm just an old man worried about bears or getting lost, if only they knew the truth. There have been more disappearances over the years. Every now and then I'll see a news story about a hiker gone missing in the Black Hills, or a camper who never returned from their trip. The authorities always chalk it up to accidents or animal attacks, but I know better. I can picture those poor souls running through the dark forest, the creature hot on their heels. I've thought about writing a book, telling my story to the world, but who would believe me? And more importantly, would it do any good? Or would it just draw more thrill seekers to the area, more potential victims for the creature? So I keep my story to myself, carrying the weight of what I know, what I've seen. It's a lonely existence sometimes, living with a truth that no one else believes. But in a way, I feel responsible. As one of the few people who have encountered the creature and lived to tell about it, I feel a duty to remember, to stay vigilant, because I know that somewhere out there, in the deep, dark forests of the Black Hills, the creature is still roaming, still hunting, still waiting. And as long as it's out there, no one who ventures into those woods is truly safe. Now, when I look at the night sky and see the stars twinkling above, I no longer feel the sense of peace and wonder I once did. Instead, I think of those glowing eyes in the darkness, and I shudder. The vastness of the universe, which once filled me with awe, now serves as a reminder of how small and vulnerable we really are. There are things out there in the darkness, things beyond our understanding. And sometimes, if we're not careful, we stumble upon them. And when we do, our lives are never the same again. So if you're ever in the Black Hills, and you hear a rustle in the bushes or see a shadow move in a way that shadows shouldn't, don't dismiss it. Don't try to rationalize it away. Run. Run as fast and as far as you can, because it might just save your life. As for me, I'll stay here in my small town watching the news for stories of missing hikers and campers, always wondering if the creature has claimed another victim. And at night, when the wind howls and the shadows grow long, I'll sit by my window, staring out into the darkness, remembering. Because some things, once seen, can never be unseen, and some experiences, no matter how much we might wish to, can never be forgotten. The creature in the Black Hills is real. I know because I've seen it. I've run from it. I've survived it. And as long as I live, I'll carry the memory of that night with me, a reminder that the world is bigger, stranger, and far more dangerous than we could ever imagine. And somewhere out there, in the deep, dark woods, the creature waits, watching, hunting, remembering, always remembering. My name is Walter Allen, and I am 78 years old. What I'm about to tell you happened to me on July 12, 1998. I remember it like it was yesterday. I had been working non-stop for months as a freelance writer, juggling deadlines and battling writer's block. The stress was getting to me, and I desperately needed a break. That's when I decided to take a solo camping trip in my RV. I had this old Winnebago that I'd bought secondhand a few years back. It wasn't much to look at, but it was reliable and comfortable enough for a weekend getaway. A friend of mine had told me about this secluded spot in the backwoods of Maine. He said it was peaceful, a good place to fish and relax. It sounded perfect. I packed up some supplies, loaded my golden retriever Cooper into the passenger seat, and hit the road early on a Friday morning. The drive was long but pleasant. As we left the city behind, the landscape gradually transformed. Concrete and steel gave way to rolling hills and dense forests. Cooper sat with his head out the window, tongue lolling in the wind. His excitement was contagious, and I found myself grinning as we wound our way along the narrow country roads. It was late afternoon by the time we reached our destination. The sun was hanging low in the sky, casting a golden hue over the dense forest. I found a small clearing near a creek that looked perfect for setting up camp. I parked the RV, making sure it was level, and stepped out to survey the area. The air was fresh, filled with the scent of pine and earth. The only sounds were the rustling of leaves and the distant call of a bird. It was a stark contrast to the constant noise of the city, and I felt the tension in my shoulders start to ease almost immediately. I set up my little campsite with a folding chair, a small table, and a grill for cooking. Cooper explored the area, his tail wagging furiously as he sniffed every tree and bush within reach. As I was arranging things, I noticed something odd. About 100 yards away, partially hidden by a cluster of trees, was an old pickup truck. The truck looked like it had seen better days. Its once red paint was now a patchwork of rust and faded color, and the tires seemed to be slowly sinking into the soft earth. It struck me as strange to see another vehicle out here, especially one that looked like it had been abandoned, but I shrugged it off, figuring it probably belonged to some old-timer who used the lake as his private fishing spot. With the campsite set up, I decided to try my luck at fishing. I grabbed my rod and tackle box and headed down to the creek, with Cooper trotting along beside me. The water was clear and cool, and I could see small fish darting about in the shallows. I found a comfortable spot on the bank and cast my line. As I sat there, enjoying the peace and quiet, I couldn't help but feel like something was off. It was too quiet. There were no crickets chirping, no frogs croaking, just the occasional splash of a fish jumping in the creek. It should have been relaxing, but something about the silence made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. After about an hour, with no luck on the fishing front, I packed up and headed back to the campsite. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. I lit a small campfire and set about cooking the dinner I had packed, some hot dogs and beans. Simple camping fare, but it smelled delicious after a long day of driving and setting up camp. As I sat by the fire, eating my dinner and sharing some hot dog with Cooper, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over me. The shadows cast by the fire seemed to dance at the edge of the clearing, creating moving shapes that my mind kept trying to turn into something sinister. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that it was just my city-dweller brain unused to the deep quiet of the forest. After dinner, I decided to take a walk to clear my head. I grabbed my flashlight, though I didn't think I'd need it yet, and set off down a narrow path that led deeper into the woods. Cooper came with me, sticking close to my side as we ventured into the growing darkness. The forest was different at night. The trees seemed to loom larger, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. The path, which had seemed clear and inviting in the daylight, now felt like it was closing in around us. I walked for about half an hour, trying to enjoy the solitude, but that nagging feeling of being watched wouldn't leave me. Just as I was about to turn back, I heard a rustling in the bushes off to my left. At first, I thought it was just a deer or maybe a rabbit, but then I heard it again, closer this time. I stopped and listened, my heart starting to beat a little faster. Cooper's ears perked up, and he let out a low growl. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet forest. "Is someone there?" There was no response, just another rustle, this time from behind me. I spun around, shining my flashlight into the darkness, but saw nothing but trees and undergrowth. Cooper was on high alert now, his body tense and ready to spring. "Come on, boy," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Let's head back." We started back down the path, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed. Every few steps I'd hear another rustle or the snap of a twig, always just out of sight. I picked up the pace, nearly jogging by the time the campfire came back into view. Back at the campsite, I added more wood to the fire, building it up until the flames leaped high into the air. The extra light made me feel a little better, pushing back the darkness and whatever might be lurking within it. Cooper settled down next to my chair, but he remained vigilant, his eyes scanning the tree line. I tried to relax, telling myself that it was just my imagination running wild. I was a city boy after all, not used to the sounds and movements of the forest at night. But as I sat there, staring into the fire, I couldn't help but feel that something was very wrong. It must have been close to midnight when I heard it. A long, low moan that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It wasn't an animal sound, at least not like any animal I'd ever heard. It was almost human, but distorted somehow, filled with a pain or anguish that made my skin crawl. Cooper jumped to his feet, barking furiously at the darkness beyond the fire's light. I stood up too, my heart pounding in my chest, and shone my flashlight out into the trees. The beam of light cut through the darkness, but I couldn't see anything unusual, just the same trees and bushes that had been there all along. "Who's there?" I shouted, trying to sound braver than I felt. "This is private property, you need to leave." There was no response, just another of those terrible moans, closer this time. Cooper's barking grew more frantic, and he started to move towards the sound. I grabbed his collar, not wanting him to run off into the dark. "Inside, Cooper," I said, my voice shaking. "We're going inside." I quickly doused the fire and gathered up my things, all the while feeling like something was watching me from just beyond the reach of my flashlight. We retreated to the RV and I locked the door behind us, drawing all the curtains tight. Inside the RV, I turned on every light I could, trying to create a safe bubble of illumination. Cooper paced restlessly, stopping every now and then to growl at the door. I sat at the small table, my flashlight and an old baseball bat I kept for protection close at hand. As the night wore on, the sounds outside grew stranger and more frequent. Sometimes it was that awful moaning, sometimes it was heavy footsteps circling the RV, and sometimes it was a light tapping like someone or something was testing the walls for weakness. I didn't sleep a wink that night. Every noise made me jump, every shadow seemed to move. I kept expecting to see a face appear at one of the windows, but there was never anything there when I looked. When dawn finally broke, it felt like I'd aged years in a single night. The forest outside was quiet now, the morning sun driving away whatever nightmares had stalked the darkness. I made a strong pot of coffee and sat looking out the window, trying to make sense of what had happened. In the light of day, it all seemed absurd. Had I really spent the entire night cowering in fear over some strange noises? I was a grown man, for heaven's sake, not some kid at summer camp telling ghost stories. I decided that I must have let my imagination run wild, fueled by too much solitude in an unfamiliar environment. Determined to salvage my weekend, I decided to spend the day exploring the area. I packed a small backpack with some essentials, water, snacks, a first aid kit, and of course my trusty flashlight. Cooper seemed eager to get out as well, his tail wagging as I hooked on his leash. As we set out, I noticed something odd. The old pickup truck I had seen the day before was gone. There were tire tracks leading away from where it had been parked, still fresh in the soft earth. It made me uneasy. Had someone been out here last night? Were they responsible for the strange noises? We hiked along the creek for a couple of hours, the exercise and fresh air helping to clear my head. Cooper enjoyed himself, splashing in the water and chasing after squirrels. We even found a small waterfall, the water cascading down moss-covered rocks into a clear pool below. As we sat by the waterfall, eating our packed lunch, I tried to rationalize the events of the previous night. Maybe it had been some local kids playing a prank. Or perhaps there were coyotes or other animals in the area that I wasn't familiar with. Anything seemed more plausible than some unknown creature stalking the woods. On our way back to the campsite, we passed by where the old truck had been. I stopped to examine the area more closely. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There were footprints in the mud, large ones, much bigger than my own, and they didn't look entirely human. The prints were elongated, with what looked like claw marks at the end of each toe. They led from where the truck had been, circled around our campsite, and then disappeared into the dense underbrush. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Cooper whined softly, pressing against my leg. I hurried back to the RV, my mind racing. What had made those prints? Why had they been circling our camp? And most importantly, were they still out there? Once back at the campsite, I debated what to do. The rational part of my brain said to pack up and leave, to get back to the safety of civilization. But another part of me, the part that had always been drawn to mysteries and unexplained phenomena, wanted to stay and figure out what was going on. In the end, curiosity won out. I decided to stay one more night, but I took some precautions. I moved the RV to a more open area where it would be harder for anything to sneak up on us. I gathered extra firewood and built up a large fire, planning to keep it going all night. I also dug out an old camera I had brought along, thinking I might be able to capture evidence if anything strange happened again. As the sun began to set, I felt my nerves start to fray. Every sound from the forest seemed magnified, every shadow a potential threat. I kept the fire blazing and sat with my back to the RV, Cooper by my side and the baseball bat within easy reach. The early hours of the night passed uneventfully. I began to think that perhaps the previous night had been a fluke, that whatever had been out there had moved on, but then, just after midnight, it started again. It began with the moaning, that same horrible, pain-filled sound I had heard the night before. It seemed to be coming from all around us, echoing through the trees. Cooper started barking, his hackles raised. I stood up, bat in hand, and scanned the darkness beyond the fire's light. That's when I saw it. Just at the edge of the clearing, partially hidden behind a large pine tree, was a figure. It was tall, much taller than a normal person, and seemed to be covered in dark, matted fur. Its eyes caught the firelight and glowed an eerie yellow. I froze, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. The creature took a step forward into the light, and I got my first clear look at it. It was like nothing I had ever seen before. It walked on two legs, but its feet were elongated and ended in sharp claws, the source of those strange prints I had seen earlier. Its arms were long, nearly touching the ground, and its hands were more like paws, also tipped with vicious-looking claws. But it was the face that truly terrified me. It was a twisted mix of human and animal features. The snout was elongated, like a wolf's, but the eyes were disturbingly human-like, filled with an intelligence that seemed to bore right through me. I raised the bat, my hands shaking. "Stay back!" I shouted, my voice cracking with fear. The creature tilted its head, almost as if it was curious. Then it opened its mouth, revealing rows of sharp teeth, and let out another of those bone-chilling moans. It took another step forward, and I could smell it now, a rank, musky odor that made my stomach turn. Cooper was going berserk, barking and growling, straining at his leash. I wanted to run, to jump in the RV and drive away as fast as I could, but I was rooted to the spot, unable to move. The creature took another step and another. It was at the edge of the fire's light now. I could see saliva dripping from its jaws, its claws flexing as if in anticipation. This was it, I thought. This is how I die. But then something unexpected happened. A loud bang echoed through the clearing, like a gunshot. The creature's head snapped around, looking towards the source of the noise. There was another bang and another. The creature let out a howl, not a moan this time, but a sound of pure animal rage, and then it turned and loped off into the darkness. I stood there, bat still raised, for what felt like hours, but was probably only a few minutes. My legs were shaking so badly I thought I might collapse. Cooper had stopped barking and was now whining softly, pressing against my leg. Then I heard footsteps approaching. I turned, ready to defend myself, but instead of another monster I saw an old man emerge from the trees. He was carrying a shotgun and had a grim expression on his weathered face. "You all right, son?" he asked, his voice gruff but not unkind. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak just yet. The old man came closer, keeping his shotgun ready. "You shouldn't be out here," he said. "These woods ain't safe, especially not at night." What was that thing?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. The old man shook his head. "Best not to ask too many questions about that. Some things a man's better off not knowing." He introduced himself as Frank. He lived in a cabin a few miles away, and had been tracking the creature for years. He wouldn't tell me much about it, just that it had been in these woods for as long as anyone could remember, and that it was dangerous. Frank helped me pack up my things and followed me in his truck as I drove the RV out of the woods. We didn't stop until we reached the nearest town, a small place called Millfield. Frank took me to a diner there, bought me a cup of coffee, and told me to go home and forget what I'd seen. But how could I forget? That creature, whatever it was, had changed everything. The world I thought I knew with its rules and logic had been turned upside down in a single night. I drove home the next day, my mind still reeling from what had happened. I told a few friends about my experience, but most of them just laughed it off, saying I must have imagined it, or that it was probably just a bear. But I know what I saw. In the years since, I've done a lot of research. I've looked into folklore and cryptozoology, trying to find some explanation for what I encountered. I've even gone back to those woods a few times, though never alone and never at night. I've never seen the creature again, but sometimes when the wind is right, I swear I can hear that mournful moan echoing through the trees. I'm an old man now, and I know most people would dismiss my story as the ramblings of a senile mind. But I know what I saw that night, and I know it was real. The memory of those glowing yellow eyes and those razor-sharp claws still haunts my dreams. Over the years, I've heard whispers of similar encounters in those woods. Hikers gone missing, campers fleeing in the middle of the night, locals warning outsiders to stay away after dark. It seems I'm not the only one who's crossed paths with the creature. I've often wondered about Frank, the old man who saved me that night. What did he know about the creature? How long had he been hunting it? I tried to find him again years later, but his cabin was abandoned, reclaimed by the forest. The locals in Millfield claimed they'd never heard of him. Cooper lived to a ripe old age, but he was never quite the same after that night. He became more protective, more alert. Until the day he died, he would sometimes wake in the middle of the night, growling at shadows only he could see. As for me, that experience changed me in ways I'm still trying to understand. I became more cautious, more aware of the thin veil that separates our orderly world from the unknown that lurks just beyond. I never went camping alone again, and to this day, the sound of rustling leaves in the dark is enough to make my heart race. I've tried to write about that night many times over the years, but the words never seem adequate. How do you describe something that shouldn't exist? How do you convey the bone-deep terror of coming face to face with the impossible? Sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind is blowing just right, I find myself listening for that moan. Part of me hopes I'll never hear it again, but another part almost wishes I would. Because as terrifying as that encounter was, it was also exhilarating in a way. It was proof that the world is bigger and stranger than we can imagine, that there are still mysteries out there waiting to be uncovered. I'm nearing the end of my life now, and I find myself thinking about that night more and more. Was the creature real, or was it some kind of shared hallucination brought on by fear and isolation? And if it was real, what was it? Some undiscovered species? A genetic experiment gone wrong? Or something older? Something that has lurked in the shadows of human civilization since time immemorial? I don't suppose I'll ever know the answers to these questions, but I do know this. Those woods hold secrets, dark and ancient secrets that are perhaps best left undisturbed. And yet there's a part of me that wishes I could go back just one more time, to stand in that clearing again, to feel the weight of the unknown pressing in from all sides. Because for all the fear and trauma that night brought me, it also gave me something precious, a glimpse behind the curtain, a peek at the true nature of our world. And once you've seen that, well, you can never really go back to seeing the world the same way again. So if you find yourself in those woods someday, and you hear a moan on the wind or see yellow eyes gleaming in the darkness, remember my story. Remember that there are things in this world that defy explanation, things that lurk in the shadows of our understanding. And whatever you do, don't go into the woods alone at night, because you never know what might be waiting for you in the darkness. As I sit here, pen in hand, trying to capture the essence of that night, I can't help but wonder, is it still out there? Is it roaming those woods even now, waiting for another unsuspecting camper to stumble into its territory? And if so, What will happen when our ever-expanding civilization finally encroaches too far into its domain? These are questions I'll likely take to my grave, but I've written this account in the hope that someday someone might find it and understand. Understand that the world is vast and mysterious, that there are things out there beyond our comprehension. And perhaps, armed with this knowledge, they'll be better prepared than I was if they ever find themselves face to face with the unknown. As for me, I've made my peace with what happened. I've lived a long life, filled with joys and sorrows, triumphs and failures. But nothing in all my years has affected me as profoundly as that night in the woods. It opened my eyes to a world of possibilities, both wondrous and terrifying. And for that, despite the fear and the nightmares, I'm grateful. So as I close this account, I leave you with this final thought. The next time you're in the wilderness and you feel that prickle on the back of your neck, that sense of being watched, don't dismiss it, because you never know. You might just be in the presence of something ancient, something primal, something that reminds us that we are not and have never been alone in this world. And with that, I lay down my pen. The story is told, the memory preserved. What happens next is up to you, dear reader. Will you dismiss this as the ramblings of an old man? Or will you look at the world a little differently, a little more cautiously, knowing what might be out there in the shadows? The choice, as always, is yours. But remember, the unknown is always waiting just beyond the light of your campfire. And sometimes, if you listen closely, you might just hear it calling your name. As the years passed, I tried to put the experience behind me, but it was never far from my thoughts. I threw myself into my work, taking on more photography assignments and traveling to different parts of the country. But no matter where I went, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. One crisp autumn day, about 5 years after my encounter in the Allegheny National Forest, I received an unexpected letter. The envelope was plain, with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a message scrawled in messy handwriting. "The forest remembers. It's time to return." My heart raced as I read those words over and over. There was no signature, no explanation, just that cryptic message that sent a chill down my spine. I knew without a doubt that it was connected to my experience in the forest. For days, I debated what to do. Part of me wanted to ignore the letter, to continue with my life, and forget about Skara and the strange events of that summer. But another part of me, the part that had always been drawn to the unknown, urged me to go back. After a week of internal struggle, I made my decision. I would return to the Allegheny National Forest, face my fears, and hopefully find some answers. I packed my RV, making sure to bring extra supplies and equipment. This time, I was determined to be prepared for whatever I might encounter. The drive to the forest was tense. Every mile brought back memories of that fateful trip. As I entered the forest, the familiar scent of pine and damp earth filled the air. It was late afternoon when I reached the clearing where I had camped before. Everything looked the same, yet somehow different. The trees seemed to loom larger, their shadows stretching towards me like grasping fingers. I parked the RV and set up camp, my movements mechanical as I tried to calm my nerves. As night fell, I sat by the campfire, listening intently to every sound in the forest. The darkness seemed to press in around me, alive with unseen presences. Around midnight, I heard it, the same heavy footsteps I had heard years ago circling the RV. My heart pounded in my chest as I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but trees and shadows. "I'm here," I called out, my voice shaking slightly. "I got your message. What do you want?" Silence answered me, then a rustling in the underbrush. I swung my flashlight towards the sound and caught a glimpse of something moving, not an animal, but not quite human either. It was tall, its form indistinct, like a piece of the forest come to life. Without thinking, I followed it. The entity led me deeper into the forest, always staying just out of clear sight. I stumbled over roots and rocks, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly as I tried to keep up. After what felt like hours, I found myself in a small clearing. In the center stood the old cabin. It looked exactly as I remembered it, dilapidated, forgotten by time. But now, in the pale moonlight, I could see that the symbol on the wall was glowing faintly. As I approached, the glow intensified, pulsing like a heartbeat. Suddenly a voice spoke from behind me. "You have returned." I spun around, my flashlight illuminating the speaker. It was an old man, his face weathered and lined, his eyes gleaming with an otherworldly light. He wore simple, worn clothes that seemed to blend with the forest around him. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The old man smiled, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp, too feral. "I am many things," he said. "Guardian, protector, punisher. Your people once called me Skara." My mind reeled. This couldn't be real. Yet here I was, face to face with the entity that had haunted my dreams for years. "Why did you bring me back here?" I managed to ask. Skara's expression turned grave. "The forest is in danger," he said. "Humans encroach further every day, destroying that which they do not understand. You, Bruce Nelson, have seen the truth. You have felt the power of the ancient woods. Now you must help protect it." I shook my head, trying to clear my thoughts. "How? I'm just a photographer. What can I do?" Skara approached me, his movement fluid and silent. He reached out and touched my forehead with a gnarled finger. Instantly my mind was flooded with images. Clear-cut forests, polluted streams, dying animals. I saw the beauty of the untouched wilderness and the destruction wrought by human hands. When the visions faded, I found myself on my knees, gasping for breath. Skara stood over me, his eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and determination. "You have a gift," he said. "Your camera can capture the truth of this place, show the world what is at stake, make them see the beauty and the danger." I nodded, understanding dawning on me. This was why I had been drawn back here. This was my purpose. "I'll do it," I said, my voice stronger now. "I'll show them the truth." Skara smiled, a genuine expression that softened his feral features. "Good," he said. "But remember, the forest does not give up its secrets easily. There will be trials, dangers. Are you prepared to face them?" I stood up, meeting Skara's gaze. "I am," I said, surprised by my own certainty. For the next few weeks I lived in the forest, guided by Skara. He showed me hidden groves, secret caves, and places of incredible natural beauty. I photographed everything, filling memory card after memory card with images that seemed to pulse with life. But it wasn't all beauty and wonder. Skara also showed me the dark side of the forest, areas ravaged by illegal logging, streams choked with pollution, the corpses of animals killed by poachers. These images were harder to capture, but I knew they were just as important. As I worked, I began to feel a change within myself. It was as if the forest was seeping into my very being, altering my perceptions. I could hear conversations in the rustle of leaves, see messages in the patterns of bark. The boundary between myself and the natural world began to blur. One night, as I sat editing my photos in the RV, I heard a commotion outside. I grabbed my camera and flashlight and ventured out. In a nearby clearing, I saw a group of men with chainsaws and heavy equipment. They were preparing to cut down a section of the forest. Without thinking, I started taking pictures, the flash illuminating the scene in stark detail. The men shouted, angry at being caught. One of them rushed towards me, but before he could reach me, a loud roar echoed through the trees. The men froze, their faces pale with fear. From the shadows emerged Skara, but not in his human form. Now he was a creature of bark and leaf, towering over the men, his eyes glowing with an inner fire. The loggers ran, leaving their equipment behind. I continued to take pictures, my hands shaking but my focus unwavering. When it was over, Skara turned to me, slowly shifting back into his human form. "You see now," he said, "the battle we face." I nodded, understanding the weight of my task. Over the next few months, I threw myself into my work with a fervor I had never known before. I documented the beauty of the forest and the threats it faced. I captured images of Skara in his various forms, sometimes human, sometimes animal, sometimes something in between. As winter approached, I knew my time in the forest was coming to an end. I had a story to tell, a message to share with the world. On my last night, Skara visited me one final time. "You have done well," he said, his voice like the whisper of wind through leaves. "But your task is not over. The world must see what you have seen. They must understand." I promised him I would do everything in my power to share the truth. As dawn broke, I packed up my RV and prepared to leave. As I drove away, I caught a glimpse of Skara in my rearview mirror, standing at the edge of the forest. Then he was gone, melting back into the trees. The months that followed were a whirlwind of activity. I organized my photographs, wrote articles, and reached out to environmental organizations. My work began to gain attention, first locally, then nationally. People were moved by the images I had captured, by the story of the forest and its ancient guardian. There were skeptics, of course. Many dismissed my tales of Skara as the ramblings of an over-imaginative photographer. But the images spoke for themselves. The beauty of the untouched wilderness, the devastation of human encroachment, these were truths that couldn't be denied. As my work spread, I began to see changes. More people visited the Allegheny National Forest, not to exploit it, but to appreciate its beauty. Conservation efforts increased. Stricter regulations were put in place to protect the land. But with the increased attention came new dangers. There were those who saw the forest as a resource to be exploited, who viewed my work as a threat to their interests. I received threatening letters, anonymous phone calls warning me to stop. I refused to be intimidated. I knew that what I was doing was important, not just for the forest, but for the world. The lessons I had learned from Skara, the connection I had formed with the natural world, these were things that needed to be shared. Years passed and I continued my work. I traveled to other forests, other wild places, always searching for the hidden wonders, always advocating for their protection. And sometimes, in the deepest, darkest parts of the woods, I would catch a glimpse of something, a shadow moving against the trees, a pair of gleaming eyes in the underbrush. And I would know that Skara, or something like him, was there, watching, protecting. Now, as I sit here in my study, surrounded by my photographs and memories, I can't help but reflect on the journey that began with that fateful camping trip. I'm older now, my hair gray, my face lined with the years. But when I close my eyes, I can still feel the pulse of the forest, still hear the whisper of Skara's voice on the wind. I know that my time is growing short. Soon I will have to pass on the task of protecting the forest to others. But I take comfort in knowing that I have done my part, that I have shared the truth of the ancient woods with the world. And sometimes on quiet nights when the wind blows just right, I think I hear a familiar voice calling me. It whispers of deep forests and hidden glades, of secrets yet to be discovered. And I know that one day when my work here is done, I will answer that call. I will return to the forest one last time, to walk among the ancient trees and stand beside their timeless guardian. Until then, I will continue to share my story, to show the world the beauty and mystery of the wild places. For in protecting them, we protect ourselves. We preserve the ancient wisdom, the deep magic that still lives in the heart of the forest. And who knows? Perhaps one day you too will hear the call of the woods. Perhaps you'll find yourself standing at the edge of a dark forest, feeling the weight of unseen eyes upon you. And if you do, remember my story. Remember that there are still wonders in this world, still mysteries to be uncovered. All you have to do is step into the shadows and listen to the whispers of the trees. My name is Edward Taylor, and I am 64 years old. What I'm about to tell you happened back in October 1987, but the memory of it is as fresh as if it were yesterday. I'd just gotten this old RV, a real piece of work from the 70s, but it had charm. I wanted to take it out for a spin, see some of the countryside, get away from my office job in Harrisburg for a bit. So I packed it up with supplies, grabbed my old dog Roscoe, and headed out to the Allegheny National Forest in Pennsylvania. Now the Allegheny is beautiful this time of year, all reds and oranges, leaves falling like rain. I found this secluded spot near the Clarion River, a place where I wouldn't be bothered. I parked the RV, set up camp, and got a fire going. Roscoe was sniffing around, happy as a clam. I cracked open a beer and just soaked it all in. The first couple of days were perfect. I'd fish in the river, cook up my catch, and just relax. There wasn't another soul around. The silence was profound, broken only by the gentle rushing of the river and the occasional call of a bird. It was exactly what I needed after months of being cooped up in my cubicle, staring at spreadsheets all day. One evening I was sitting by the fire, Roscoe at my feet, and I heard this rustling in the bushes. Now, I'm not the type to get spooked easily. I figured it was a raccoon or something, but Roscoe... He perked up and started growling. "Calm down, boy," I said, but he wouldn't. He was staring at the tree line, his fur standing on end. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it into the woods. Nothing. Just darkness and the occasional glint of eyeshine from some critter. I shrugged it off and went back to my beer, but Roscoe remained tense, his eyes fixed on the forest. I tried to dismiss it, but there was something about his behavior that made me uneasy. Later that night I woke up to Roscoe barking like mad. I stumbled out of the RV, flashlight in hand, and tried to calm him down. That's when I noticed the strange tracks around the campsite. They were big, bigger than any animal I'd seen out here, and they weren't paw prints. They looked almost human, but with clawed toes. I told myself it was probably a bear with a weird gait or something, but the next day I found more of those tracks, leading from the river to the RV. It didn't sit right with me. I decided to keep a closer eye on things, maybe cut my trip short if it got any weirder. That evening I heard something again. This time it was closer, and it sounded like something heavy moving through the brush. I armed myself with a hunting knife, didn't have a gun on me, which I was starting to regret. Roscoe and I sat in the RV, lights off, waiting. He was right beside me, growling low. I didn't sleep much that night. Around dawn I must have dozed off because I woke up to find the fire out and Roscoe gone. I called for him, but there was no response. Panic set in as I searched the area, following the tracks I found, which led deeper into the forest. The morning mist hung low, making everything look eerie and unfamiliar. I found him eventually, but it was too late. Roscoe was dead, his body torn apart like he'd been mauled by something big. It looked like the work of a bear, but those tracks, they weren't bear tracks. I buried him there, my heart heavy, and decided I needed to leave fast. As I was packing up, I heard a sound behind me, a low, guttural noise that made my skin crawl. I turned, knife in hand, and saw it. This creature standing on two legs covered in matted fur, with eyes that glowed in the dim light. It was like something out of a nightmare, part man, part beast. I didn't stick around to get a better look. I jumped into the RV and floored it, tearing down the dirt road like a bat out of hell. I didn't stop until I reached a ranger station miles away. I told them what happened, but they didn't believe me. They chalked it up to a bear attack and a scared man seeing things. But I know what I saw. It wasn't a bear. It was something else, something that shouldn't exist. I haven't been back to the Alleghenies since, and I never will. Whatever that thing was, it's still out there, waiting. I've spent years trying to put it out of my mind, but it always comes back, especially in the dead of night when I can't sleep. I've read up on folklore, trying to find something that matched what I saw. The closest I got was an old story about a creature called skookum, an old term some folks use for Sasquatch or Bigfoot. But this wasn't Bigfoot. It was meaner, more primal. I try not to dwell on it, but sometimes when I'm alone I can still hear that rustling in the bushes, see those glowing eyes in my mind. I don't tell many people about it because, frankly, who'd believe a guy like me? Just an old office worker who likes to camp. But you asked, so there it is. My name is Edward Taylor, and that's my story. Take it or leave it, but if you ever find yourself in the Allegheny National Forest, keep your eyes open. You never know what's lurking just beyond the firelight. The years since that incident have been challenging, to say the least. I tried to go back to my normal life, back to my job in Harrisburg, but things were never quite the same. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those glowing eyes staring back at me. Every rustle of leaves outside my window made me jump. I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Reeves. He was patient, listened to my story without judgment. He suggested that what I experienced might have been a stress-induced hallucination, a manifestation of my subconscious desire to escape the monotony of my daily life. Part of me wanted to believe him. to accept that rational explanation and move on, but I couldn't shake the feeling of those eyes on me, the memory of those tracks in the mud. My work started to suffer. I couldn't concentrate, kept making mistakes in my reports. My boss, Mr. Johnson, called me into his office one day. He was concerned, said I wasn't the same since I came back from my camping trip. I couldn't tell him the truth. Who would believe me? So I made up some story about a bad case of food poisoning, said I was still recovering. He gave me some time off, told me to come back when I was feeling better. But I didn't get better. The nightmares got worse. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, convinced that the creature was right outside my bedroom window. I started drinking more than I should, trying to numb the fear, to get a few hours of dreamless sleep. One night, about 6 months after the incident, I hit rock bottom. I was sitting in my living room, half a bottle of whiskey in me, when I heard a noise outside. It was probably just the wind, or maybe a stray cat, but in my alcohol-addled mind, I was sure it was the creature. I grabbed my old hunting knife and stumbled outside, ready to confront it. My neighbor, Mrs. Grayson, found me the next morning, passed out on my front lawn, still clutching the knife. She called an ambulance, and I spent the next week in the hospital, detoxing and undergoing psychiatric evaluation. That was my wake-up call. I realized I couldn't go on like this. The creature, whether real or imagined, was destroying my life. I had to find a way to move past it, to reclaim my sanity. I threw myself into research. I spent hours at the local library, poring over books on cryptozoology, folklore, and unexplained phenomena. I reached out to other people who claimed to have had similar experiences. Most of them seemed like crackpots, but a few had a look in their eyes that I recognized, the look of someone who's seen something they can't explain, something that's shaken their understanding of the world. One of these people was a retired forest ranger named Frank. He'd worked in the Allegheny for over 30 years before retiring. We met at a small diner just outside of Harrisburg. Frank was in his 70s with a weathered face and hands that spoke of a lifetime spent outdoors. "I've heard stories," he told me, his voice low. "Things that don't make sense, things that shouldn't exist, but they do." He told me about strange sightings over the years. Tracks that didn't match any known animal. Campers going missing, only to turn up miles away with no memory of what happened. And once, late at night on a routine patrol, a glimpse of something moving through the trees. Something big, walking on 2 legs. "I never reported it officially," Frank said. "Who'd believe me? But I know what I saw, and I believe you, Edward. You're not crazy." Those words meant more to me than Frank could ever know. For the first time since that night in the forest, I felt a sense of validation. I wasn't alone in this. Frank introduced me to a small group of people who met regularly to discuss their experiences with the unexplained. There was Mary, a school teacher who'd had a close encounter while hiking in the Rockies. John, a truck driver who swore he'd seen something impossible one night on a lonely stretch of highway in Nevada. And Rachel, a young woman whose brother had gone missing in the woods near their family's cabin in Maine. We'd meet once a month, sharing our stories, our theories, our fears. It wasn't always easy. There were times when I'd leave those meetings feeling more unsettled than ever. But there was also a sense of community, of shared experience. We understood each other in a way that no one else could. Over time, I started to heal. The nightmares became less frequent. I was able to go back to work, to function in my day-to-day life. But I never forgot what I saw that night in the Allegheny. I never stopped looking for answers. I retired from my job a few years ago. With more time on my hands, I've dedicated myself to investigating other reports of strange creatures in the forests of Pennsylvania. I've hiked miles of trails, interviewed dozens of witnesses, and compiled a database of sightings and encounters. I'm not sure what I'm looking for exactly. Proof? Closure? Maybe I'm just trying to make sense of what happened to me all those years ago. But every time I hear about a new sighting, every time I find a set of tracks that don't quite match any known animal, I feel a mix of fear and excitement. Sometimes late at night I find myself thinking about going back to that spot by the Clarion River. Part of me wants to face my fears, to see if I can find any trace of what I encountered. But then I remember Roscoe, remember those glowing eyes in the mist, and I stay put. I don't know if I'll ever fully understand what happened that night in October 1987. Maybe it was a hallucination, a product of stress and isolation. Maybe it was something more, something science can't explain. All I know is that it changed me, set me on a path I never expected. To this day, I can't look at the woods the same way. Every shadow holds the potential for mystery, for terror. But there is also a sense of wonder. The world is bigger, stranger than most people realize. And somewhere out there, in the depths of the forest, something is waiting, something that challenges everything we think we know about the natural world. My name is Edward Taylor. I'm 64 years old, and this is my ongoing search for the truth behind the shadow in the Allegheny. As the years passed, my obsession with understanding what happened that night in the Allegheny only grew stronger. I found myself drawn deeper into the world of cryptozoology and unexplained phenomena. My retirement savings, which I'd once dreamed of using for a quiet life of gardening and crossword puzzles, were now being funneled into equipment for my investigations: night vision goggles, high-quality cameras, audio recording devices, and more. I started a blog, Shadows in the Woods, where I shared my experiences and findings. At first, it was just a way to organize my thoughts and connect with others who might have had similar encounters. But over time, it grew into something more. People from all over the country started reaching out to me, sharing their own stories of strange encounters in the wilderness. One day, I received an email that made my heart race. It was from a man named Robert who claimed to have had an experience eerily similar to mine in the same area of the Allegheny National Forest. He described the same kind of tracks, the same feeling of being watched, and even mentioned a low guttural sound that sent chills down my spine. I arranged to meet Robert at a small cafe in Warren, Pennsylvania, just outside the forest. He was younger than me, probably in his early 40s, with a haunted look in his eyes that I recognized all too well. As we talked, I could see the relief on his face, the same relief I'd felt when I first met Frank. The validation of knowing you're not alone, that someone else understands. Robert's encounter had happened just 2 years ago. He'd been on a solo camping trip, much like I had been. "I thought I was losing my mind," he told me, his hand shaking slightly as he clutched his coffee mug. "I didn't tell anyone about it for months. Who would believe me?" I nodded, understanding all too well. "What made you decide to reach out?" I asked. He hesitated for a moment before answering. I think I saw it again, last week. I was driving home late at night on one of those back roads that wind through the forest. There was something in the road. At first I thought it was a bear, but then it stood up. My breath caught in my throat. "Did you get a good look at it?" Robert shook his head. "It was too dark, but I saw the eyes. God, those eyes. They glowed in my headlights. And then it was gone, disappearing into the trees faster than anything that size should be able to move." We talked for hours, comparing notes, theories, experiences. By the time we left the cafe, it was dark outside. As we stood in the parking lot, I could see the edge of the forest looming in the distance, a wall of blackness against the night sky. "What do you think it is?" Robert asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I shook my head. "I don't know, but I intend to find out." That meeting with Robert reignited my determination. I decided it was time to go back to where it all began. I knew it was risky. The memories of that night still had the power to send me into a cold sweat. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the answers I sought were waiting for me in those woods. I spent weeks preparing for the trip. I upgraded my RV, installing security cameras and reinforcing the doors and windows. I bought a satellite phone, determined not to be cut off from help like I had been before. And this time I made sure I was armed, a decision that didn't sit entirely comfortably with me but felt necessary given what I had experienced. As I drove back into the Allegheny National Forest, I felt a mix of emotions: fear, excitement, apprehension. The familiar landscape brought back a flood of memories. I found myself scanning the tree line constantly, half expecting to see a pair of glowing eyes staring back at me. I set up camp near my old spot by the Clarion River, but not too close. The sound of the running water was both soothing and unsettling, reminding me of those peaceful days before everything went wrong. As night fell, I sat in my RV, monitoring the feeds from my security cameras, listening intently for any unusual sounds. For the first few days, nothing happened. I hiked during the day looking for signs, unusual tracks, broken branches, anything out of the ordinary. At night, I'd return to the safety of my RV, always on high alert. It was exhausting, both physically and mentally. On the fourth night, something changed. I was jolted awake by a high-pitched sound, somewhere between a whistle and a scream. It was unlike anything I'd ever heard before. I fumbled for my glasses and looked at the security camera feeds. There, at the edge of the camera's range, I saw movement. My heart pounding, I zoomed in on the feed. What I saw made my blood run cold. It was only for a moment, but I saw a large, dark shape moving through the trees. It was too big to be a normal animal, and its movements were wrong. Fluid yet jerky, like nothing I'd ever seen before. I grabbed my satellite phone, intending to call for help, but then I hesitated. This was what I'd come for, wasn't it? The chance to see it again, to confirm that I hadn't imagined it all those years ago. With shaking hands, I put down the phone and picked up my camera instead. Slowly, carefully, I opened the RV door and stepped outside. The night was eerily quiet now, the earlier sound having faded away. I swept my flashlight across the tree line, my camera at the ready. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then I heard it. A low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I spun around, trying to locate the source of the sound. And that's when I saw them. Two glowing eyes just at the edge of my flashlight's beam. I raised my camera, my finger on the shutter button, but before I could take the shot, the eyes vanished. There was a rush of movement, the sound of something large crashing through the underbrush, and then silence. I stood there for what felt like hours, my heart hammering in my chest, waiting for it to return. But it didn't. Eventually, as the sky began to lighten with the approaching dawn, I retreated back to the safety of my RV. As I sat there reviewing the footage from my cameras, I felt a mix of frustration and elation. I hadn't managed to get a clear photo, but I had seen it. It was real. All these years, all these doubts, and now I had confirmation. But what exactly had I seen? The glimpses I'd caught didn't match any known animal. It moved like nothing I'd ever encountered before. And those eyes, they had an intelligence behind them that sent shivers down my spine. I spent the next week in the forest, hoping for another encounter. But whatever it was, it didn't show itself again. I found tracks, similar to the ones I'd seen all those years ago, but they always seemed to vanish, as if the creature could appear and disappear at will. When I finally left the Allegheny, I had more questions than answers. But I also had a renewed sense of purpose. I knew now, beyond any doubt, that there was something out there, something unknown to science, something that defied explanation. I threw myself back into my research with renewed vigor. I reached out to experts in various fields, biologists, anthropologists, even a few open-minded physicists. I shared my experiences, my footage, my theories. Some dismissed me outright, but others were intrigued. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a wildlife biologist from the University of Pittsburgh, was particularly interested in my findings. "What you're describing doesn't fit any known species," she told me during one of our long phone conversations. "But that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. The world is full of undiscovered creatures." She agreed to accompany me on my next expedition into the Allegheny. Having a scientist by my side gave me a new perspective on my search. Elena taught me how to collect samples properly, how to document evidence in a way that would be taken seriously by the scientific community. Our first few trips together were uneventful, but Elena remained patient and curious. "Nature doesn't reveal its secrets easily," she would say. "We have to be persistent." It was on our fifth trip together that everything changed. We were setting up camp for the night when we heard that same high-pitched sound I'd heard before. Elena's eyes widened. "That's no animal call I've ever heard," she whispered. We spent the night on high alert, our cameras and recording equipment at the ready. Just before dawn, we saw it, a large, dark shape moving through the trees at the edge of our campsite. Elena gasped beside me, her scientific skepticism crumbling in the face of what we were seeing. The creature moved with an unnatural grace, its form seeming to shift and change as it moved through patches of moonlight and shadow. And then it turned, and we saw its eyes, glowing, intelligent, and unmistakably aware of our presence. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, it watched us. I felt rooted to the spot, unable to move, barely able to breathe. And then, as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone, melting back into the darkness of the forest. Elena and I looked at each other, both of us pale and shaken. "What was that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. I shook my head. "I don't know, but now you see why I've been searching all these years." That encounter changed everything. With Elena's backing, my research began to be taken more seriously in scientific circles. We published papers, gave lectures, and gradually built a small but dedicated team of researchers, all focused on uncovering the truth behind the creature in the Allegheny. We've made progress over the years. We've collected hair samples that don't match any known species. We've recorded vocalizations that defy explanation. We've even managed to capture a few blurry photographs and videos. But the creature remains elusive. For every step forward we take, it seems to take 2 steps back into the shadows. It's as if it's playing a game with us, revealing just enough of itself to keep us searching, but never enough for us to truly understand what it is. And so, the search continues. I'm older now, my hair gray, my joints aching after long days in the woods. But I can't give up. Not when I know it's out there, watching, waiting. Sometimes, in my darker moments, I wonder if we're meant to solve this mystery. If perhaps there are things in this world that are beyond our understanding, that defy our attempts to categorize and explain them. But then I think of that night by the Clarion River, of Roscoe, of all the years I've dedicated to this search. And I know I can't stop. Not until I have answers. Not until I understand what it is that lurks in the shadows of the Allegheny. As our research team grew and our findings became more substantial, we began to attract attention from unexpected quarters. It started with a series of anonymous emails hinting at government knowledge of similar creatures in other parts of the country. At first I dismissed them as the ramblings of conspiracy theorists, but then came the phone call that changed everything. It was a crisp autumn evening, much like the one when I first encountered the creature all those years ago. I was in my study, reviewing some recent field notes when my phone rang. The voice on the other end was deep, authoritative, and decidedly cautious. "Mr. Taylor," the voice said, "my name is Agent Simmons. I'm with a specialized branch of the Fish and Wildlife Service. We need to talk about your research in the Allegheny." My heart raced. Was this validation or the beginning of a cover-up? I agreed to meet Agent Simmons at a neutral location, a quiet diner just outside of Pittsburgh. When I arrived at the diner the next day, I found a man in his 50s, with close-cropped gray hair and the kind of physique that suggested years of field work rather than desk duty. He didn't look like the government agent I'd imagined. "Mr. Taylor," he said, extending his hand, "thank you for meeting me. What I'm about to tell you is classified. I'm risking a lot by reaching out, but I believe your work is too important to be silenced." Over the next 2 hours, Agent Simmons painted a picture that was both terrifying and exhilarating. The creature I'd encountered in the Allegheny wasn't an isolated phenomenon. Similar beings had been spotted in remote areas across North America, in the Pacific Northwest, the Ozarks, even as far north as the Yukon. "We've been tracking these sightings for decades," Simmons explained, his voice low. "There's a pattern, but we're no closer to understanding what these creatures are or where they come from." I leaned in, my coffee long forgotten. "Why are you telling me this? Why now?" Simmons sighed, rubbing his temples. "Because we're at a dead end. Our superiors want to bury this, pretend it doesn't exist. But some of us, we believe the public has a right to know. Your research, Dr. Rodriguez's involvement, it's bringing scientific credibility to something we've been struggling with for years." He slid a USB drive across the table. "This contains some of our findings, sighting reports, a few grainy photos, audio recordings. Use it, but be careful. There are people who don't want this information getting out." As I left the diner, my mind was reeling. The USB drive felt like it was burning a hole in my pocket. I couldn't wait to get back to my lab and dive into its contents. The data on the drive was a goldmine. It corroborated many of our theories and provided new avenues for research. But it also raised troubling questions. If these creatures were so widespread, how had they remained hidden for so long? And more importantly, what were they? Over the next few months, our research took on a new intensity. We cross-referenced our findings with the government data, identifying patterns and connections we'd never seen before. We expanded our field research, sending teams to some of the hotspots Simmons had identified. But as our work progressed, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Cars would follow me for a few blocks before turning away. I'd catch glimpses of unfamiliar faces lurking at the edges of our campsites. Elena noticed it too. "Edward," she said one evening as we were reviewing some new data, "do you think we're in danger? Maybe we should go public with what we know for our own protection." I considered her words carefully. The thought had crossed my mind, but I was hesitant. If we go public now without concrete proof, we'll be laughed out of the scientific community. We need something irrefutable. Elena nodded, but I could see the worry in her eyes. "Just be careful, okay? This is bigger than we imagined." She was right, of course. It was bigger than we'd imagined, and it was about to get even more complicated. It was during a routine expedition in the Allegheny that we made the breakthrough we'd been hoping for, and dreading. We were testing a new type of thermal imaging camera, hoping to capture clear footage of the creature. As night fell, we set up our equipment in a clearing, the same one where I'd had my first encounter all those years ago. The air was thick with tension and anticipation. Hours passed with no activity, and I was beginning to think it would be another fruitless night. Then, just as the first light of dawn was beginning to creep over the horizon, our sensors went wild. Something large was moving through the underbrush, circling our camp. I held my breath, my hand steady on the camera controls, and then it stepped into the clearing. The thermal imaging painted it in shades of red and orange, but the shape was unmistakable. Bipedal, but not human. Massive, easily 7 feet tall, with long arms that nearly reached the ground. Its head was elongated, almost conical, and as it turned to look directly at our camera, I saw those eyes again, glowing not with reflected light, but with an inner intelligence that sent chills down my spine. For several long moments it stood there, as if studying us as intently as we were studying it. And then, to our amazement, it raised one of its hands. The gesture was unmistakable. It was waving at us. Before we could react, it turned and loped back into the forest, moving with that strange, fluid grace I remembered from my first encounter. We were left in stunned silence, our cameras having captured every moment of the encounter. As we huddled around our equipment, reviewing the footage with shaking hands, I felt a mix of elation and terror. We had our proof, clear, undeniable evidence of the creature's existence. But that wave, it suggested a level of intelligence, of self-awareness that raised a host of new questions. "We need to get this back to the lab immediately," Elena said, her voice trembling with excitement. "This changes everything." I nodded, but a sense of unease was growing in the pit of my stomach. I couldn't shake the feeling that by capturing this footage, we had crossed a line, that the rules of the game had changed. As we packed up our equipment, I noticed movement at the edge of the clearing. For a moment, I thought the creature had returned. But then I saw the glint of metal, a gun barrel catching the early morning light. "Get down," I yelled, just as the first shot rang out. We dove for cover as bullets peppered the ground around us. Through the chaos, I saw dark-clad figures emerging from the trees, moving with military precision. "The cameras!" Elena shouted. "We can't let them get the footage." I nodded, my heart pounding. While Elena provided covering fire with the hunting rifle we'd brought for protection, I scrambled to grab our most important equipment, the thermal camera and its precious footage. We ran, crashing through the underbrush, the sound of pursuit close behind us. I felt a burning sensation in my arm. A bullet had grazed me, but there was no time to stop. We had to get to the RV to safety. As we burst out of the tree line onto the road where we'd parked, I saw something that made my heart sink. Our RV was engulfed in flames, a clear message from our pursuers. We were cut off with nowhere to go. "This way," Elena gasped, pulling me towards the river. It was our only chance, to lose ourselves in the water and hope for a miracle. As we stumbled into the rushing current of the Clarion River, I clutched the thermal camera to my chest. Whatever happened, we had to protect this evidence. It was too important to lose. The cold water shocked my system, nearly causing me to lose my grip on the camera. Elena and I fought against the current, trying to put as much distance as possible between us and our pursuers. The sound of gunfire faded, replaced by the roar of the river. Just as I thought we couldn't go on any longer, I felt something grab me. For a terrifying moment, I thought it was one of our attackers. But the grip was too strong, too sure. I turned my head and found myself staring into those glowing eyes I knew so well. The creature had come to our rescue. With impossible strength, it pulled Elena and me from the river, carrying us effortlessly through the forest. I wanted to speak, to ask the 1,000 questions that were racing through my mind, but I was too exhausted, too overwhelmed. Eventually, we stopped in a small cave, hidden behind a waterfall. The creature set us down gently, then stepped back, regarding us with what I could only describe as concern. "Thank you," I managed to croak out, still clutching the camera. The creature made a series of clicks and whistles, a language I couldn't begin to understand. Then, to my amazement, it reached out and touched the camera. It knew what we had captured. It understood the importance of our discovery. As Elena and I huddled in the cave trying to process what had happened, I realized that everything had changed. We had our proof, but at what cost? Who were the people trying to silence us? And most importantly, what was our responsibility now? To science, to the public, and to the incredible being that had saved our lives. The creature stood at the entrance of the cave, its massive silhouette framed by the cascade of water. It was standing guard, protecting us. In that moment, I understood that we had become part of something much larger than a scientific investigation. We had stumbled into a hidden world, a secret that some would kill to protect. As the adrenaline of our escape began to wear off, the reality of our situation set in. We were cut off from civilization, presumed dead by our attackers, with only the clothes on our backs and the precious footage we'd captured. And our only ally was a creature that, until recently, had been nothing more than a legend. Elena voiced the question that was on both our minds. "What do we do now, Edward?" I looked at the creature, then back at Elena. "We find a way to tell the world the truth," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "But first we need to understand, really understand." My name is Buckley Drayton, and this is the story of an event that changed my life forever. It was the fall of 1992, and I had just turned 35. I had always been an outdoorsman, more at home under a canopy of trees than within the confines of four walls. There was something about the crisp air, the smell of pine, and the sound of leaves crunching underfoot that made me feel truly alive. That year I decided to take my RV out to a spot in the Uinta Mountains in Utah. A buddy of mine, Tom, had told me about this place. He swore by its serene beauty and lack of crowds. "Buck," he'd said, his eyes gleaming with excitement, "you've got to check out this spot. It's like God carved out a little slice of heaven and hid it away just for us." I remember the day I left as clear as if it were yesterday. It was a crisp October morning, the kind where you can see your breath hanging in the air like a cloud. I packed up my RV with all the essentials. Enough food to last a couple of weeks, a few good books I'd been meaning to read, my trusty fishing gear, and of course my loyal companion, Rufus. Rufus was a big friendly mutt with a bit of Labrador in him. He had a shaggy coat of brown and white fur, and eyes that seemed to understand every word I said. I'd found him at a shelter a few years back, and we'd been inseparable ever since. He was always up for an adventure, his tail wagging at the mere sight of my hiking boots. I wasn't much of a gun guy, so I didn't carry one. Never really needed it before, and I figured this trip wouldn't be any different. Looking back, I wish I'd been better prepared, but hindsight, as they say, is 20/20ths. The drive to the Uinta Mountains was long but beautiful. We left early in the morning, the sun just beginning to peek over the horizon as we pulled out of my driveway in Salt Lake City. Rufus sat in the passenger seat, his head out the window, tongue lolling in the wind. His excitement was contagious, and I found myself grinning as we wound our way along the highway. As we got further from the city, the landscape began to change. The flat, urban sprawl gave way to rolling hills, which in turn became the jagged peaks of the Yunta Range. The road narrowed and began to wind its way up into the mountains, each turn revealing a view more breathtaking than the last. We stopped a few times along the way, once at a small diner where I grabbed a coffee and Rufus got to stretch his legs. The waitress, a friendly older woman named Betty, warned me about the unpredictable weather up in the mountains. "You be careful up there, honey," she said as she refilled my cup. "Weather can turn on a dime. 1 minute it's sunny, the next you're in the middle of a snowstorm." I assured her I'd be careful, but her words stuck with me as we continued our journey. It was late afternoon by the time we reached the turnoff Tom had told me about. The road, if you could call it that, was little more than a dirt track winding its way through the trees. The RV bounced and jolted as we made our way deeper into the forest, the branches of the trees scraping against the sides like fingers trying to hold us back. Just when I was starting to think we'd taken a wrong turn, the trees opened up, revealing a small clearing next to a crystal-clear lake. The water was so still it looked like a mirror, perfectly reflecting the snow-capped peaks that surrounded it. It was, just as Tom had said, a slice of heaven. I parked the RV in a flat spot about 50 yards from the shore, positioning it so that I had a clear view of both the lake and the surrounding forest. As soon as I opened the door, Rufus bounded out, his nose to the ground as he explored our new surroundings. The air was crisp and clean, filled with the scent of pine and something else, something wild and untamed. I took a deep breath, feeling the tension of the long drive melt away. This, I thought, is exactly what I needed. I spent the next hour or so setting up camp. I leveled out the RV, set up a small table and chairs outside, and gathered some wood for a fire. By the time I was done, the sun was starting to dip behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. I cracked open a beer and settled into one of the chairs, watching as the last light of day faded and the stars began to appear. Out here, away from the city lights, the night sky was a sight to behold. Thousands upon thousands of stars twinkled overhead, so many that it seemed impossible to count them all. Rufus lay at my feet, his head on his paws, occasionally lifting it to sniff the air. The only sounds were the gentle lapping of the lake against the shore and the crackle of the fire. It was peaceful, serene, everything I had hoped for when I planned this trip. As the night wore on and the temperature dropped, I decided to turn in. I put out the fire, made sure Rufus had enough water, and locked up the RV. That night I slept better than I had in years, lulled to sleep by the gentle sounds of the forest. The next few days fell into a pleasant routine. I'd wake up early, make a pot of coffee, and sit outside watching the mist rise off the lake as the sun came up. After breakfast, Rufus and I would go for a long hike, exploring the surrounding area. The forest was dense and old, filled with towering pines and ancient oaks. We'd often spot deer and even caught a glimpse of a black bear one afternoon, though it seemed more afraid of us than we were of it. In the afternoons, I'd fish in the lake. The water was teeming with trout, and it wasn't long before I had more fish than I knew what to do with. Evenings were spent by the fire, reading or just sitting in comfortable silence, enjoying the peace and solitude. It was on the third night that things began to change. I had just finished cleaning up after dinner and was sitting by the fire, Rufus at my feet as usual. The night was clear and cool, with a half-moon casting a soft light over the clearing. I was considering turning in when I noticed something odd. The forest had gone quiet. Now anyone who spent time in the woods knows that they're never truly silent. There's always something. The hoot of an owl, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush, the wind in the trees. But at that moment, there was nothing. It was as if someone had suddenly hit the mute button on the world. I sat up straighter, suddenly alert. Rufus must have sensed it too because he lifted his head, his ears perked forward. I held my breath, straining to hear something, anything. For a long moment there was nothing but the crackle of the fire. Then I heard it, a snap of a twig so faint I almost missed it. It came from the edge of the clearing just beyond the reach of the firelight. I stood up slowly, peering into the darkness. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the stillness. "Is someone there?" No response came, but I could have sworn I saw something move in the shadows. A shape darker than the surrounding night, shifting between the trees. Rufus was on his feet now, a low growl rumbling in his chest. I'd never heard him make a sound like that before, and it sent a chill down my spine. I took a step towards the trees, my heart pounding in my chest. "Who's there?" I called again, trying to keep my voice steady. "If you need help, just say so." Still no response, but the shape moved again, this time definitely closer to the edge of the clearing. I could almost make out a form, tall and thin, with long, gangly limbs. For a split second I thought I saw the glint of eyes reflecting the firelight, but then it was gone, melting back into the shadows. Rufus barked, a sharp, aggressive sound that made me jump. He took a few steps towards the trees, his hackles raised, but I called him back. Whatever was out there, I didn't want him getting too close to it. I quickly doused the fire and retreated to the RV, locking the door behind us. I pulled all the curtains closed and turned on every light inside, suddenly grateful for the generator that allowed me to keep the darkness at bay. Rufus paced restlessly, moving from window to window, his growl never quite stopping. I tried to calm him down, but it was no use. He knew something was out there, something that shouldn't be. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat at the small table in the RV, a cup of coffee growing cold in front of me, my eyes fixed on the door. Every so often I thought I heard something moving outside, a rustle here, a scrape there. Once I could have sworn I heard breathing, right outside the window. But when I peeked through the curtains, there was nothing there. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the trees, the tension slowly began to ease. Rufus finally settled down, curling up on the small couch and falling into an exhausted sleep. I rubbed my eyes, feeling the weight of the sleepless night. Part of me wanted to pack up and leave right then and there. But in the light of day, my fears from the night before seemed almost silly. It was probably just an animal, I told myself, a deer or maybe even the bear we'd seen earlier. The isolation and the darkness had just gotten to me, that's all. I decided to stay. After all, I'd come out here for solitude, hadn't I? It wouldn't do to run away at the first sign of something unusual. Besides, I'd already told Tom I'd be out here for at least a week. If I came back early, he'd never let me hear the end of it. So I stayed. But I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over me. I found myself jumping at small noises, constantly looking over my shoulder. Rufus seemed on edge too, staying closer to me than usual on our walks and growling at shadows. The next couple of days passed without incident, but the peace I'd felt at the beginning of the trip was gone. I tried to enjoy myself, to focus on the fishing and the hiking, but I couldn't relax. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that shape in the darkness, those glinting eyes. It was on the 5th night that things came to a head. I'd been extra careful that day, making sure to be back at the RV well before sunset. I'd built up the fire higher than usual, hoping the light and heat would keep whatever was out there at bay. Rufus and I were sitting by the fire, me nursing a beer, him gnawing on a bone I'd brought for him. The night was clear again, the stars bright overhead. But there was a tension in the air, a feeling of anticipation that set my nerves on edge. It started with the silence again. One moment, the night was filled with the normal sounds of the forest. The next, nothing. Rufus was on his feet in an instant, hackles raised, a low growl rumbling in his chest. I stood up slowly, my eyes scanning the tree line. For a long moment there was nothing. Then I saw it, the shape from before, but closer now, almost at the edge of the clearing. In the firelight, I could make out more details, and what I saw made my blood run cold. It was tall, easily 7 or 8 feet, with long, thin limbs that seemed too long for its body. Its skin, if you could call it that, was a mottled gray-green color, like the lichen that grew on the rocks by the lake. But it was the face that truly terrified me. It was almost human, but not quite. The eyes were too large, too round, glowing with an unnatural yellow light. The mouth was a lipless slash, filled with sharp, pointed teeth. I stumbled back, nearly falling over my chair. Rufus was barking now, a frenzied sound full of fear and aggression. The creature took a step forward, its movements jerky and unnatural, like a puppet being controlled by an unskilled hand. I didn't think, I just reacted. I grabbed the flashlight I'd left on the table and shone it directly at the creature's face. It let out a horrible shriek, a sound that was part animal roar, part human scream, and covered its eyes with long-fingered hands. I used that moment of distraction to run for the RV, Rufus right on my heels. I slammed the door shut behind us, fumbling with the lock as I heard the creature recovering. There was a thud against the side of the RV, then another. The whole vehicle shook with the impact. I grabbed my cell phone, cursing when I saw there was no signal. Of course there wasn't. We were miles from the nearest tower. I was on my own. The creature circled the RV, occasionally striking it hard enough to rock it on its wheels. I could hear it breathing, heavy and ragged, could smell a foul odor seeping in through the vents, a mixture of rotting vegetation and something metallic, like old blood. Rufus was going crazy, barking and growling, jumping from window to window. I tried to quiet him, afraid his noise would agitate the creature further, but it was no use. This went on for what felt like hours. The creature would circle the RV, occasionally striking it or scratching at the windows. Then it would retreat for a while, only to return again just when I thought it might be gone. As the night wore on, I found myself wondering if I'd finally cracked. Maybe this was all some vivid hallucination brought on by too much solitude. But every time I thought that, another blow would rock the RV, reminding me that this was all too real. Finally, as the first light of dawn began to color the sky, the attacks stopped. I waited, hardly daring to breathe for what felt like an eternity. But there was nothing, no movement, no sound. When I finally worked up the courage to peek out the window, the clearing was empty. There was no sign of the creature, no evidence of the night's events, except for some deep scratches in the side of the RV. I didn't wait around to see if it would come back. I packed up as quickly as I could, my hands shaking so badly I could barely manage the simplest tasks. Rufus stayed close, whining softly, his tail tucked between his legs. As I drove away from that clearing, I kept expecting to see the creature burst out of the trees to chase us down. But nothing happened. We made it back to the main road without incident, and I didn't slow down until we were well clear of the mountains. I reported what happened to the local authorities when I got back to civilization. But as I expected, they didn't take me seriously. They suggested it was probably a bear. Or maybe I'd seen a person and my mind had played tricks on me in the darkness. But I know what I saw. That thing, whatever it was no bear, and it certainly wasn't human. I never went back to that spot in the Yunta Mountains. In fact, I sold my RV not long after and stopped camping altogether. Rufus never quite recovered from the experience either. He became nervous around strangers and would howl uncontrollably at night sometimes, as if reliving that terrifying experience. Years have passed since that night, but I still wake up sometimes in a cold sweat, the image of that creature vivid in my mind. I've heard stories since then, whispered around campfires by other hikers and campers. Stories of a creature that stalks the remote areas of the Yunta Range, preying on the unwary. They call it different names, the Yunta Yeti, the Mountain Wraith, but the descriptions are always the same. Tall, thin, with glowing eyes and a shriek that freezes the blood. I don't know what it was that I encountered that night, some undiscovered species, a creature from another dimension, or something else entirely. All I know is that it was real, and it was out there. And sometimes on dark nights when the wind howls outside my window, I can't help but wonder if it's still out there, waiting in the shadows for its next victim. My name is Donald Thomas, and I am 82 years old. What I'm about to tell you happened to me on July 14th, 1992. I remember the date because it was the last day of my life that felt ordinary. I had taken my RV out to a secluded part of the Rockies, wanting a break from the noise of Denver. My buddy, Rex Lowell, joined me. Rex and I go way back to high school, and we've done a lot of stupid things together over the years. We left Denver early that morning, the city skyline fading in the rearview mirror as we headed west into the mountains. The drive was beautiful, winding roads cutting through dense forests and alongside pristine lakes. Rex and I chatted about old times, laughing at memories of our younger, more reckless days. By late afternoon, we found the perfect spot to set up camp. It was one of those picturesque locations you see on postcards, a small clearing near a babbling stream surrounded by towering pines. The air was crisp and clean, filled with the scent of pine needles and wild herbs. We parked the RV and started setting up our campsite. Rex, ever the prepared one, had brought enough beer to sink a battleship. We joked about his definition of essentials as we unloaded our gear. I set up the fishing rods while Rex got the fire going. The sound of the crackling flames mixed with the gentle rush of the stream, creating a peaceful ambiance that made all the stresses of city life melt away. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, we sat by the fire, grilling burgers and trading stories. Rex was in the middle of recounting his last fishing trip, a tale that grew more outlandish with each retelling, when we heard a rustling in the trees. It was faint, but enough to make us both turn our heads. Rex chuckled, dismissing it as probably just a deer, and went back to his story. But something didn't sit right with me. I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone out here in the wilderness. Maybe it was just paranoia, the result of too many years in the city making me jumpy in the quiet of nature. But still, that nagging feeling persisted. I decided to check it out, more to put my mind at ease than anything else. Grabbing my flashlight, I stood up, ignoring Rex's playful jabs about me being paranoid. The trees closed in around me as I moved away from the warm circle of firelight. I swept the beam of my flashlight back and forth, illuminating the underbrush and the trunks of the massive pines. At first I saw nothing unusual, just the expected forest scenery. But just as I was about to head back, convinced I was indeed being overly cautious, I heard it again. It was closer this time, a sort of shuffling sound, like something dragging through the underbrush. My heart rate picked up, and I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cooling night air. "Rex, come here," I called, trying to keep my voice steady. I heard him saunter over, his footsteps crunching on the pine needles covering the forest floor. "You're a jumpy old man, Don," he said, but his jovial tone faded when he heard the noise too. We both stood there, flashlights pointing into the darkness, listening intently. Then, without warning, something darted across the beam of my flashlight. It was fast, too fast to get a good look at, but what I did see made my blood run cold. It was large, larger than any animal I'd expect to see in these woods, and it moved with an unnatural, jerky gait. Rex swore and took a step back. "What the hell was that?" he muttered, all traces of humor gone from his voice. We decided it was probably a bear or maybe a large elk spooked by our presence, but even as we said it, neither of us really believed it. Whatever we had seen didn't move like any animal I was familiar with. We headed back to the fire, but the night had taken on a different feel. The shadows seemed deeper, the sounds of the forest more ominous. We both kept glancing over our shoulders, our earlier laughter and easy conversation fading into tense silence. When we finally called it a night and retreated to the RV, I made sure to lock the door. Rex raised an eyebrow at me. "You really think a bear's gonna bust in here?" he joked, but I could hear the nervousness under his attempted humor. I felt better with the door locked, even if it was probably unnecessary. Sleep didn't come easily. I lay in my bunk, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the forest, trying to convince myself that every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig wasn't something sinister. Rex's snores from the other side of the RV provided a comforting, normal sound in the unsettling quiet. Around midnight, I woke up to a strange sound. It was a scratching, faint at first but getting louder. I sat up in my bunk, heart pounding, straining my ears. It wasn't the wind, and it definitely wasn't an animal rubbing against the RV. This was deliberate, methodical. I got up, moving as quietly as I could, and peered out the window. In the pale moonlight, I saw something that made my blood freeze in my veins. There was a figure outside, circling the RV. It was tall, unnaturally so, with long, spindly limbs and a hunched back. It moved with that same jerky, unnatural gait we'd seen earlier in the woods. With shaking hands, I shook Rex awake. "There's something outside," I whispered, my voice barely audible. He groaned and sat up, rubbing his eyes. "You're seeing things, old man," he grumbled, but he got up and looked out the window too. I saw the color drain from his face as he spotted the creature. "What the hell is that?" he breathed. We watched in horrified fascination as the thing moved around the RV, scratching at the metal, testing the windows. Its movements were purposeful, intelligent. This wasn't some curious animal. It was hunting, searching for a way in. I grabbed the only weapon we had, a rusty old hunting knife I kept in the RV for emergencies. Rex, always more practical, found a tire iron. We stood there, hardly breathing, listening to the thing move around us. The scratching continued, sometimes soft, sometimes loud enough to make the whole RV vibrate. Then suddenly it stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the scratching had been. We waited, every second feeling like an hour, straining our ears for any sound. Finally, Rex peeked out the window again. "It's gone," he said, but neither of us felt like sleeping after that. We spent the rest of the night sitting at the small table in the RV, jumping at every sound, the knife and tire iron close at hand. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the trees, we finally felt safe enough to venture outside. What we found made my stomach churn. Deep scratches marred the side of the RV, the metal gouged and twisted in places. But it was the tracks in the dirt that really got to me. They looked almost human, but too big, with long, claw-like impressions where the toes should be. We didn't say much as we packed up camp, both lost in our own thoughts. The beautiful spot that had seemed so peaceful just yesterday now felt hostile and dangerous. Every shadow held a potential threat, every rustling leaf a harbinger of that thing returning. We drove for a few hours, hardly speaking. We were both on edge, scanning the trees for any sign of the creature. As we pulled into a small town, we finally began to relax a bit. The sight of other people, of normalcy, helped ease the tension that had built up over the night. Rex suggested we stop for lunch and maybe get some gas. We found a small diner, ordered burgers, and tried to laugh off the events of the night before. But our laughter was forced, our jokes falling flat. We both knew that what we had seen wasn't something we could easily dismiss. As we were finishing up our meal, an old man sitting at the counter turned to us. "You boys camping up in the mountains?" he asked. There was something in his tone that made my skin crawl, a knowing look in his rheumy eyes. "Yeah, but we cut it short," Rex replied. "Saw something weird last night." The old man nodded slowly, his gnarled hands wrapped around a chipped coffee mug. "You're lucky you got out," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "Folks around here call it the Snatcher. It's been taking people for years. Most don't come back." He went back to his coffee then, like he hadn't just said something terrifying. Rex and I exchanged a look, both of us suddenly eager to be back on the road. We paid our bill quickly, filled up the RV, and hit the road, putting as much distance between us and those mountains as we could. We didn't talk much on the way back to Denver, both lost in our thoughts. What the old man had said kept playing in my head. The Snatcher. It sounded like something out of a horror movie, but we'd seen it with our own eyes. The scratches on the RV, those inhuman tracks, it had all been real. Back in Denver, life went back to normal, or at least it seemed to on the surface. I went back to work, met friends for drinks, watched baseball games. But underneath it all, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had narrowly escaped something terrible. The memory of that night in the mountains haunted me, creeping into my dreams and making me jump at shadows. I started researching, looking for any information I could find on the Snatcher. There wasn't much, just a few vague stories and legends. People disappearing in those mountains, bodies never found. Search parties coming back with strange stories of noises in the night, and an overwhelming sense of being watched. I found one account from a guy who claimed to have seen it, but his story was rambling and incoherent, full of contradictions and impossible details. Rex tried to put it behind him, throwing himself into work and going out more than usual. But I could tell it haunted him too. We'd meet up for a beer sometimes, and he'd bring it up, his voice low and his eyes darting around like he was afraid someone might overhear. "Do you ever think about that night, Don?" he'd ask. And I'd nod, because how could I not? We'd seen something that night, something that shouldn't exist, something that defied explanation. How do you just forget something like that? A few months after our trip, Rex went missing. He'd gone camping alone, something he'd never done before. When he didn't show up for work on Monday, they found his truck parked at a trailhead, but no sign of him. Search parties combed the area for days, but they never found a trace. It was like he'd vanished into thin air. I knew what had happened. The Snatcher had gotten him. The thing we'd seen that night had come back for him. I tried telling the police, but they looked at me like I was crazy. Probably fell or got lost, they said. Maybe an animal attack. But I knew better. After Rex disappeared, I couldn't stay in Denver. The city felt too small, too confining. Everywhere I went, I saw reminders of Rex, of the life we'd had before that night in the mountains. I sold my RV. I couldn't bear to look at it anymore, not with those scratches still visible despite my best efforts to buff them out, and moved to a different state, trying to outrun the memories. But no matter where I go, I can't escape what happened. Sometimes at night I hear scratching at my window, and I know it's still out there, waiting. People ask me why I don't go camping anymore, and I just smile and shrug. Bad experience, I say. They laugh, thinking I'm joking, but I never am. Because I know the snatcher is real, and it's still out there, somewhere in the dark, waiting for its next victim. And every night, as I double-check my locks and peer out into the darkness, I wonder, will I be next? The years have passed, but the memory of that night hasn't faded. I've grown older, my hair has turned gray, and my joints ache in the cold, but the fear, that's as fresh as ever. I've tried to move on, to convince myself that it was all just a bad dream or a hallucination brought on by too much beer and too little sleep. But deep down, I know the truth. I've become something of a recluse over the years. My neighbors probably think I'm just a cranky old man, always peering out my windows, jumping at shadows. Little do they know the reason behind my paranoia. I've installed security cameras all around my house, motion sensors that alert me to any movement outside. Some might call it excessive, but they haven't seen what I've seen. There have been nights when I've woken up in a cold sweat, the echo of that scratching sound ringing in my ears. I'll rush to check the cameras, my heart pounding, only to find nothing but the empty street and swaying trees. But sometimes, just sometimes, I catch a glimpse of something. A tall, shadowy figure at the edge of my property, gone in the blink of an eye. Am I imagining it? Has the fear finally driven me mad? Or is it really out there, watching, waiting? I've tried to warn others. I've posted on online forums, sharing my story, trying to caution people about the dangers lurking in those mountains. Most dismiss me as a crackpot, spinning yarns for attention. Some are more sympathetic, sharing their own stories of strange encounters in the wilderness. But none of them truly understand. None of them have seen the snatcher up close, felt the primal terror of being hunted by something that shouldn't exist. Over the years, I've collected newspaper clippings, police reports, anything I can find about disappearances in those mountains. The pattern is clear to me, even if no one else sees it. Every few years, someone goes missing. The circumstances are always similar. Experienced hikers who suddenly vanish without a trace, campers whose tents are found abandoned, search parties that come back with strange stories of eerie sounds in the night and an overwhelming sense of being watched. I've tried to go to the authorities with my findings, but they brush me off. I'm just a crazy old man to them, seeing patterns where none exist. But I know the truth. The snatcher is real, and it's still out there, still hunting. Sometimes in my darker moments, I wonder if I should have done more. Should I have gone back to those mountains, tried to find it, to stop it? But then I remember that night, the inhuman speed and strength of the creature, and I know that I would have been no match for it. All I can do now is try to warn others, to keep the memory of Rex alive, and to stay vigilant. As I sit here, writing this down, I can't help but wonder, will anyone believe me? Will this account be dismissed as the ramblings of a senile old man, or will it serve as a warning to others? I don't know. All I know is that I had to get it down, to leave some record of what happened that night in the mountains. To whoever reads this, be careful out there. The world is bigger and stranger than you know, and there are things in the dark that defy explanation. And if you ever find yourself in those mountains and you hear a strange scratching in the night, run, run, and don't look back, because the snatcher is real, and it's always hunting, always waiting for its next victim. As for me, I'll keep watching, keep listening, because I know that one day, maybe soon, I'll hear that scratching again. And this time I fear there will be no escape. My name is George Moore, and I'm 75 years old now. What I'm about to tell you happened to me in late October 1996. I've never been much of a storyteller, but this one stuck with me. I think about it every day. It all started when I decided to take my old RV out for a spin. I was trying to escape the humdrum of everyday life, you see. My job at the local hardware store was starting to wear on me, and the constant bickering with my ex-wife over alimony payments was driving me up the wall. I needed a break, some time to clear my head and reconnect with nature. I set my sights on the Black Hills in South Dakota. It's a beautiful place, especially during the off-season when the tourists have gone home and the forests are painted in vibrant autumn colors. I'd been there a few times before, but never in the fall. I figured it would be the perfect spot to unwind and maybe do some fishing. I wasn't planning on going alone, though. My buddy, Hank Browning, agreed to come along. Hank and I had been friends since high school. He was a wiry guy, always up for an adventure, with a mop of graying hair that never seemed to stay in place. We'd been through thick and thin together, from double dates gone wrong in our teens to helping each other through divorces in our 40s. He was my go-to for trips like this. We spent a few days getting ready for the trip. I tuned up the RV, checking the oil and making sure the tires were in good shape. It was an old beast, a 1978 Winnebago Brave that I'd bought second-hand a few years back. It had its quirks, but it had never let me down. Hank, meanwhile, was in charge of supplies. He showed up at my place the night before we left with enough food to feed an army: canned beans, hot dogs, packets of instant coffee, and of course plenty of beer. He'd also picked up a few packs of cigarettes, even though we'd both been trying to quit. "Hey, we're on vacation," he said with a grin when I raised an eyebrow at the smokes. We set off early the next morning, just as the sun was starting to peek over the horizon. The drive was long but pleasant. We took turns at the wheel, swapping stories and listening to old country tunes on the radio. As we got closer to the Black Hills, the landscape changed. The flat prairie gave way to rolling hills, and soon we were surrounded by dense forests of ponderosa pine and spruce. It was late afternoon when we finally reached our destination. We'd found a secluded spot near a creek, about 10 miles from the nearest town. It was perfect. Trees surrounded us on all sides, and the only sounds were birds chirping and leaves rustling in the breeze. We parked the RV, and I breathed in deep, savoring the crisp autumn air. "This is the life, eh, George?" Hank said, clapping me on the shoulder. I couldn't help but smile. It did feel good to be away from it all. We spent the rest of that first day setting up camp. We cleared a spot for the fire, gathered some firewood, and set up our fishing gear by the creek. As the sun started to set, we lit the campfire and cracked open a couple of beers. Hank was in rare form that night, regaling me with stories about his latest failed attempt at fixing up his old Mustang. "I swear, George," he said, taking a swig of beer, "that car's more stubborn than my ex-wife. I replace one part, and 2 more break down." We laughed, and it felt good. I couldn't remember the last time I'd laughed like that. The first night passed uneventfully. We cooked some hot dogs over the fire, had a few more beers, and reminisced about the old days. "Remember that time in '69 when we drove all night to see Woodstock," Hank said, "only to get there and find out it was over?" I chuckled at the memory. We'd been so disappointed, but we ended up having our own little party in the car on the way back. As the fire died down to embers, we retired to the RV. Hank took the fold-out couch while I climbed into the small bedroom in the back. I fell asleep almost instantly, lulled by the sound of the creek and the gentle wind in the trees. The next day was spent fishing and exploring the area around our campsite. We didn't catch much, just a couple of small trout that we threw back, but it was relaxing. We hiked a bit, marveling at the fall colors and the sheer size of some of the old pines. It was on the second night that things started to get strange. We were sitting by the fire again, Hank telling me about his daughter's upcoming wedding. "I can't believe my little girl's getting married," he said, shaking his head. "Makes a man feel old." I was about to reply when we heard a weird noise from the woods. It sounded like branches snapping, but louder, more deliberate. We both fell silent, listening intently. "Probably just a deer," I said after a moment, trying to keep things light. But something about the sound had set me on edge. Hank, always the curious one, grabbed a flashlight from the RV. "Come on," he said, "let's check it out." I hesitated. "I don't know, Hank, maybe we should just stay here." But Hank was already heading towards the trees. "Don't be such a scaredy cat, George. Where's your sense of adventure?" Sighing, I grabbed another flashlight and followed him. The woods were pitch black beyond the circle of our campfire. Our flashlight beams cut through the darkness, casting eerie shadows among the trees. We walked slowly, our footsteps muffled by the carpet of pine needles. We didn't see anything unusual at first, just trees and more trees. Then, after about 10 minutes of walking, we stumbled upon something unexpected. An old, dilapidated cabin. It was a small structure, probably no more than 1 or 2 rooms. The wood was gray and weathered, and it looked like it hadn't been touched in years. The door was hanging off its hinges, and the windows were broken, leaving jagged shards of glass in the frames. "Think anyone lives here?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Hank shone his flashlight through one of the broken windows. "Doubt it," he said. "Place looks abandoned." As we stood there, staring at the cabin, I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the cool night air. Something about this place felt wrong. "We should head back," I said. Hank nodded, looking relieved. As we turned to leave, I thought I saw something move out of the corner of my eye. I whipped my head around, but there was nothing there. Just shadows and trees. "You okay, George?" Hank asked, noticing my sudden movement. "Yeah," I said, trying to shake off the eerie feeling. "Just thought I saw something. Trick of the light, probably." We made our way back to the RV in silence, both lost in our own thoughts. Back at the campsite, we tried to shake off the weird vibe from our little expedition. Hank cracked open another beer and turned on the small radio we'd brought along, but all we got was static. "Must be too far out for a signal," he said, fiddling with the dial. After a few minutes of nothing but white noise, he gave up and turned it off. We sat by the dying fire for a while longer, but the easy camaraderie of earlier in the evening was gone. There was a tension in the air that neither of us could quite shake. Finally, we decided to call it a night. I climbed into my bunk while Hank took the couch. As I lay there in the darkness, I couldn't get the image of that old cabin out of my mind. Who had lived there? Why had they left? And why did it feel so wrong? I must have eventually drifted off because the next thing I knew I was being jolted awake by a loud bang. It sounded like something had hit the side of the RV. I sat up, my heart pounding. For a moment I thought I might have dreamed it, but then I heard it again, a solid thump against the metal siding. I grabbed my flashlight and nudged Hank awake. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. Hank sat up, rubbing his eyes. "Hear what?" he started to say. But then the sound came again, louder this time. His eyes widened. "What the hell is that?" "I don't know," I said, "but I'm going to check it out." I grabbed the only weapon we had, an old hunting knife I kept in a drawer for emergencies. "Be careful," Hank said as I headed for the door. I stepped outside, flashlight in one hand, knife in the other. The night was pitch black, and the air was unnaturally still. No wind, no animal sounds, nothing. I walked slowly around the RV, shining the light on the ground, looking for any signs of what might have caused the noise. Nothing. No tracks, no broken branches, nothing out of place. I was about to head back inside when I heard it again, this time from behind me. I spun around, my heart in my throat, but all I saw were shadows. I went back inside, my nerves on edge. Hank was waiting by the door, his face pale in the dim light. "Find anything?" he asked. I shook my head. "Nothing. But I swear, Hank, something's out there." We spent the rest of the night sitting up, jumping at every little sound. When dawn finally broke, we were exhausted but relieved. Everything looked normal in the light of day, but we couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Over breakfast, instant coffee and cold beans straight from the can, we debated what to do. Part of me wanted to pack up and leave right then, but Hank argued that we were probably just spooking ourselves over nothing. "Look," he said, "we came out here to relax, right? So let's relax. We'll go fishing, maybe hike a bit. If anything weird happens again, we'll leave. Deal?" I reluctantly agreed. We spent the morning by the creek, fishing poles in hand, but neither of us caught anything. The fish seemed to have disappeared overnight. Even the birds were quiet. The whole forest felt wrong somehow, like it was holding its breath. Around midday, we decided to hike back to the old cabin we'd found the night before. I wasn't keen on the idea, but Hank insisted. "Maybe we missed something last night," he said. "Could be some clue about what made those noises." As we approached the cabin, we noticed something we hadn't seen in the dark: large, claw-like marks on the wooden door. They were deep and looked fresh, the wood around them still light-colored where it had been exposed. "Looks like a bear," Hank said, though he didn't sound convinced. "Maybe," I replied, but my gut told me otherwise. The marks were too high up for a bear, and they didn't look quite right. They were more like, well, I didn't know what they were like, but they sent a shiver down my spine. We didn't stay long at the cabin. Something about the place made my skin crawl, and even Hank seemed eager to leave. We hiked back to the RV in silence, both lost in our own thoughts. That night, we made sure to lock the RV doors and windows. We stayed up late, keeping watch. Around midnight, the noises started again. This time it was a scratching sound, like something was trying to get inside. Hank grabbed the flashlight and peered out the window. "Do you see anything?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Nothing," he replied. "It's too dark." The scratching continued for what felt like hours. We didn't sleep at all that night. When morning finally came, we found more claw marks on the RV, deeper and more menacing than the ones on the cabin. "We need to get out of here," I said, and for once, Hank didn't argue. We packed up quickly, tossing our gear haphazardly into the RV. I climbed into the driver's seat and turned the key, but nothing happened. The engine cranked and cranked, but wouldn't start. We popped the hood and checked everything we could think of: the fuel line, the battery, the spark plugs. Everything seemed fine. It just wouldn't start. "Looks like we're stuck here," Hank said grimly. We debated our options. The nearest town was about 10 miles away. We could try to hike there, but the thought of being out in those woods, especially if night fell before we made it, was terrifying. On the other hand, staying put didn't seem much safer. In the end, we decided to hike. We packed some supplies into our backpacks: water, some food, a first aid kit, and of course the hunting knife. We left a note in the RV explaining where we'd gone, just in case anyone came looking for us. As we set off, the forest felt oppressive, like it was closing in on us. We kept hearing noises: twigs snapping, leaves rustling, but we never saw anything. Every so often we'd catch a whiff of a strange, musky odor that neither of us could identify. After a couple of hours of walking, we stumbled upon a small clearing with an old, overgrown trail. It wasn't on any map we had, but it seemed to head in the direction of the town. "What do you think?" Hank asked, wiping sweat from his brow despite the cool air. I hesitated. The trail didn't look like it had been used in years, and something about it made me uneasy. But it was heading in the right direction, and it had to be easier than pushing through the underbrush. "Let's give it a try," I said finally. We followed the trail, which twisted and turned through the forest. The further we went, the more uneasy I felt. The air grew colder, and an eerie silence settled over us. No birds, no insects, not even the sound of wind in the trees. Suddenly, we came upon another clearing. In the center stood an old stone well. It looked ancient, with moss and vines creeping over it. The stones were weathered and cracked, and the wooden frame that once held a bucket was rotted and broken. "This place gives me the creeps," Hank said, voicing what we were both thinking. "Let's keep moving," I replied, eager to get back on the trail. But as we turned to leave, we heard a sound that froze us in our tracks, a low, guttural growl coming from the direction of the well. "What the hell was that?" Hank whispered, his face pale. "I don't know," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "and I don't want to find out. Let's go." We backed away slowly, our eyes fixed on the well. That's when we saw it. Something emerging from the shadows behind the well. It was tall, much taller than a man, with matted fur and glowing eyes. It moved in a way I'd never seen before, not quite like an animal, not quite like a human. For a moment we all just stood there, Hank and I paralyzed with fear, the creature watching us with those glowing eyes. Then, as if someone had flipped a switch, we both turned and ran. We crashed through the underbrush, no longer caring about following the trail. Branches whipped at our faces and thorns tore at our clothes, but we didn't slow down. We could hear it behind us, crashing through the forest. The sound of its pursuit drove us on, even as our lungs burned and our legs ached. Just as I thought my heart might burst from the strain, we burst out of the forest onto a dirt road. There was an old pickup truck parked there and a man loading firewood into the back. "Help!" Hank shouted between gasps for air. "Help us!" The man turned, his eyes widening as he took in our disheveled, terrified state. Without a word, he motioned for us to get in the truck. We didn't hesitate, scrambling into the bed of the pickup among the logs. As we drove away, I glanced back at the forest. There, at the edge of the trees, stood the creature. It didn't follow, just watched us go with those glowing eyes. I shuddered and turned away, not looking back again until we reached the town. We went straight to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Thompson was a grizzled old man who looked like he'd seen his fair share of strange things, but even he seemed skeptical when we told him our story. "You boys been drinking?" he asked, eyeing. As we drove away, I glanced back at the forest. There, at the edge of the trees, stood the creature. It didn't follow, just watched us go with those glowing eyes. I shuddered and turned away, not looking back again until we reached the town. We went straight to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Thompson was a grizzled old man who looked like he'd seen his fair share of strange things. But even he seemed skeptical when we told him our story. "You boys been drinking?" he asked, eyeing us suspiciously. "Not enough to imagine that," Hank replied, his voice still shaky. The sheriff sighed and leaned back in his chair. "Look, I've heard all sorts of stories about those woods over the years. Hunters gone missing, hikers seeing strange lights, that sort of thing. But I've never seen anything myself." "But you believe us, right?" I asked, desperate for someone to take us seriously. Sheriff Thompson was quiet for a long moment. "I believe you saw something," he said finally. "Whether it was what you think it was, well, that's another matter. But I'll send a deputy out to check the area just to be safe." We gave him directions to our campsite, and he promised to call us once they'd investigated. Hank and I checked into the only motel in town, a rundown place with peeling wallpaper and beds that creaked ominously when you sat on them. But after what we'd been through, it felt like luxury. We spent a restless night, jumping at every sound and peering out the windows at shadows. The next morning we got a call from the sheriff. They'd found our campsite, but the RV was gone. No claw marks, no sign of anything unusual. It was like it had never happened. "Are you sure this is where you were camped?" the sheriff asked when we met him at the station. "Positive," Hank said. "I don't understand. How could the RV just disappear?" The sheriff shook his head. "I don't know what to tell you, boys. There's no sign of foul play, no evidence of any creature like you described. As far as I can tell, there's nothing out there but trees and rocks." We left the station feeling deflated and confused. Had we imagined it all? But no, the terror had been too real, the memories too vivid. We stayed in town for a few more days, trying to make sense of what had happened. We asked around, hoping someone might have seen something or heard similar stories. Most people just shrugged us off, but a few of the older residents would get a faraway look in their eyes when we mentioned the creature. One old-timer at the local diner, after making sure no one else was listening, leaned in close and whispered, "You boys ain't the first to see it, you know. My grandpappy used to tell stories about something in those woods, called it the Skade. Said it was an old spirit, something left over from before people came to these parts, hunts those who disturb its rest." We left town a few days later, hitching a ride back to civilization with a friendly trucker. Neither of us spoke much on the journey home. What was there to say? We'd seen something that defied explanation, something that shouldn't exist in our rational modern world. For weeks afterward, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I kept seeing those glowing eyes in my nightmares, hearing that low growl in the quiet of the night. Hank tried to move on, to pretend it had never happened, but I could see the change in him. He stopped going on trips, became more reclusive. We drifted apart over the years, the shared experience that should have brought us closer instead driving a wedge between us. I've thought about that trip every day for the past 28 years. I've read every book I could find on local legends, on cryptids and unexplained phenomena. I've gone back to the Black Hills a few times, always in the safety of daylight, always with other people around. I've never seen the creature again, never found any trace of our old campsite or the cabin in the woods. But I know what I saw. I know it was real, whatever it was. And I know that out there in the dark forests of the Black Hills, something is waiting. Something old, something patient, something that doesn't like its solitude disturbed. I still go camping sometimes, but never alone, and never in the Black Hills. Some places, I've learned, are better left unexplored. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. And some creatures are better left undisturbed in the deep, dark woods where they dwell. As I sit here now, an old man with more years behind me than ahead, I can't help but wonder. Did we merely glimpse something that's always been there, hidden just beyond the edge of our perception? Or did we, through some cosmic accident, stumble into a world not meant for human eyes? I'll never know for sure. But sometimes on quiet nights when the wind whispers through the trees outside my window, I think I hear it. A low, guttural growl. A sound that takes me back to those dark woods, to that moment of terror and wonder. And I lie awake, staring at the shadows, remembering. The Black Hills keep their secrets well. But sometimes, just sometimes, they let one slip. And once you've seen behind the veil, well, there's no going back. You carry it with you, that knowledge, that fear. It becomes a part of you, as surely as the blood in your veins or the breath in your lungs. So if you find yourself in the Black Hills, camping under those ancient pines, and you hear something moving in the darkness, don't go looking. Don't seek out the shadows, because you might just find what's hiding there. And trust me, some things are better left unseen. My name is Frank Jackson, and I am 66 years old. This happened to me in September of 2004. I decided to take a break from my job at the auto repair shop in Allentown, Pennsylvania. My boss was okay with it since things were slow, and I needed some peace and quiet away from the noise and grime of the garage. So I loaded up my RV and headed out to the Pine Barrens of New Jersey, hoping to find some solitude and maybe even catch a few fish. I parked the RV in a secluded spot near a small lake. It was the kind of place where cell signals disappeared and the stars came out in full force at night. Perfect for what I needed. I brought along some fishing gear, a cooler full of beer, and a few good books. My dog Max, a loyal but lazy old hound, was my only company. The first couple of days were bliss. I fished, read, and cooked simple meals over a campfire. The Pine Barrens were beautiful in a quiet, haunting way. The trees seemed to close in on you, and the nights were darker than I was used to. I felt like I was on the edge of the world. On the third night, things started to get strange. I was sitting by the fire, sipping a cold beer, when Max started growling at something in the trees. It wasn't like him to get riled up. Usually he was content to lie by the fire and sleep. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it into the woods, but I didn't see anything. Probably just a raccoon or a deer, I told myself. The next morning I found strange tracks around the RV. They were too large for a deer and had an odd shape, almost like a human hand, but with longer, more pointed fingers. I couldn't figure out what made them. Max sniffed around and whined, clearly unsettled. That day I decided to hike a bit deeper into the forest. I brought my shotgun just in case. I wasn't expecting trouble, but the tracks had put me on edge. I walked for a couple of hours, following an old trail that seemed to be used by wildlife more than people. The forest was thick, and the undergrowth made it slow going. Around midday, I stumbled upon an old cabin. It looked abandoned, with the windows boarded up and the roof sagging in places. Curious, I approached and tried the door. It creaked open, and a musty smell hit me. Inside, it was dark and cluttered with old furniture and rusty tools. It looked like no one had been there in years. As I poked around, I found a journal stuffed into a drawer. The entries were dated back to the 1970s. Most of it was mundane, detailing the life of someone named Thomas who had lived there, hunting and trapping. But the last few entries were different. Thomas wrote about strange noises at night, shadows moving through the trees and feeling like he was being watched. The final entry was unfinished, ending abruptly mid-sentence. I left the cabin feeling uneasy. Whatever had driven Thomas away, I hoped it was long gone. but the tracks around my RV and Max's behavior kept nagging at me. That night I couldn't sleep. Every sound seemed amplified, and the darkness felt oppressive. Around midnight I heard it, a low, rumbling noise that didn't belong to any animal I knew. It was deep and resonant, vibrating through the air. Max was up again, growling and barking at the door. I grabbed my shotgun and flashlight, heart pounding, and stepped outside. The forest was silent except for that noise. It seemed to come from all around, echoing through the trees. I shone my light into the darkness, catching glimpses of movement but nothing concrete. Then the noise stopped and everything was still. I didn't sleep at all that night. At dawn I decided it was time to pack up and leave. The peaceful getaway I'd hoped for had turned into something else entirely. As I was loading up the RV, I heard rustling in the bushes nearby. I turned, shotgun at the ready, and saw a figure step out from the trees. It was tall, at least 7 feet, and covered in matted fur. Its eyes glowed in the morning light, and its hands ended in long, claw-like fingers. It moved with an unnatural grace, watching me with a predatory gaze. Max barked furiously, but the creature didn't flinch. I didn't wait to see what it would do next. I fired a shot into the air, hoping to scare it off, and jumped into the RV. I started the engine and tore out of there, not looking back until I was miles away. Max was still shaking, but he stayed close to me, still trembling. I drove straight to the nearest town, where I found a small diner and sat down to collect myself. I told the waitress, an older lady with a kind face, about what had happened. She listened patiently, nodding along. When I finished, she told me about local legends of a creature that lived in the deepest parts of the Pine Barrens. She said it was an old story, something parents told their kids to keep them from wandering too deep into the woods. But she'd heard enough tales from hunters and campers over the years to believe there might be something to it. I didn't stick around to find out more. I headed back to Allentown. My peaceful break turned into a nightmare I couldn't quite explain. I told a few friends about it, but most just laughed it off or said I'd been seeing things. But I knew what I saw. That creature, or whatever it was real. I never went back to the Pine Barrens. The memory of that creature's eyes stayed with me, a reminder that there are still things in this world that defy explanation. And sometimes, those things are best left alone. A few weeks after my return, I read a small article in the local paper about a missing hiker in the Pine Barrens. The search had been called off due to dangerous conditions and lack of leads. I couldn't help but wonder if that creature had found another victim, but I kept those thoughts to myself, knowing most people wouldn't believe me. Life went back to normal, or as normal as it could be. I returned to work, trying to put the experience behind me, but every now and then, when the nights were especially dark and quiet, I'd hear that low rumbling noise in my mind, and I'd remember those glowing eyes watching from the trees. The Pine Barrens became a place of mystery and fear for me, a reminder that sometimes the old stories hold a grain of truth, and sometimes it's better to heed the warnings and stay away from the shadows lurking in the woods. As the years passed, I found myself thinking about that camping trip more and more. The memory of it never faded, unlike so many other experiences from my past. It was as if those few days had been burned into my mind, every detail sharp and clear. I started doing some research, quietly at first. I'd go to the library after work, poring over old newspapers and local history books. I found more stories dating back decades of strange sightings in the Pine Barrens. Most were dismissed as hoaxes or the product of overactive imaginations, but there was a consistency to them that sent chills down my spine. One day, about 5 years after my encounter, I received a letter. It was postmarked from a small town near where I'd camped, and the handwriting on the envelope was shaky, as if written by someone very old or very frightened. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a message scrawled across it. I saw it too. We need to talk. The letter was signed by someone named Robert Grayson. There was a phone number at the bottom of the page. For days I debated whether to call. Part of me wanted to forget the whole thing, to pretend that camping trip had never happened. But another part, a part I couldn't ignore, needed answers. Finally, I picked up the phone and dialed the number. It rang 3 times before someone answered. Hello? The voice on the other end was gruff, cautious. Is this Robert Grayson? I asked. There was a pause, then, who's asking? I took a deep breath. My name is Frank Jackson. I got your letter about what you saw in the Pine Barrens. The line went quiet for so long I thought he might have hung up. Then, meet me at the Pinewood Diner tomorrow at noon. Come alone. The line went dead. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, I told my boss I had a doctor's appointment and drove the 2 hours to the diner. It was a small place, the kind you find all over rural America, with faded vinyl booths and a counter with chrome stools. I spotted Robert Grayson immediately. He was sitting in a booth at the back, an old man with a weathered face and eyes that darted nervously around the room. I slid into the seat across from him. "Mr. Grayson," I said. He nodded, then leaned in close. "You saw it, didn't you? The creature?" I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and fear at finally being able to talk to someone who believed me. 5 years ago, I was camping near Atzian Lake. Grayson's eyes widened. "That's where I saw it too, 30 years ago. I was a forest ranger back then, thought I knew those woods like the back of my hand. But that night," he trailed off, lost in the memory. I waited, not wanting to push him. Finally, he continued. "I was doing a night patrol. There had been reports of poachers in the area. I was near the old Thompson cabin when I heard this sound, like nothing I'd ever heard before. Low and rumbling, but almost like words, you know?" I nodded, remembering the sound that had haunted my dreams for years. "Then I saw it," Grayson said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Tall as a bear, standing on its hind legs, but moving like a man, covered in this matted fur. And its eyes, God, those eyes. Glowing," I said, "like they were lit from within." Grayson nodded vigorously. "Exactly. I ran. Didn't stop until I got back to my truck. Drove straight to the ranger station and quit on the spot. Told them I was done. Couldn't explain why without sounding crazy." "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was yellowed with age, the creases well worn. He smoothed it out on the table. It was a map of the Pine Barrens. "I've been tracking the sightings," he said, "for years, gathering stories, marking locations, and I found a pattern." He pointed to a spot on the map, circled in red. "Here, this is where most of the sightings cluster. And it's not just the creature. Strange disappearances, unexplained sounds, lights in the sky, all centered around this area." I leaned in, studying the map. The circled area was deep in the barrens, miles from any road or town. "What's there?" I asked. Grayson shook his head. "That's what I've been trying to figure out, but I'm too old now to go tromping through the woods. When I saw the article about your sighting, I knew I had to reach out. Someone needs to find the truth." I sat back, my mind reeling. "What are you asking me to do?" "Go back," he said simply. "Find out what's really out there. I've got all the information I've gathered over the years. Maps, witness accounts, everything. It's yours if you want it." I stared at him, then at the map. The rational part of my brain was screaming at me to walk away, to forget all of this. But another part, the part that had never stopped wondering about what I'd seen that night, was already making plans. "I'll do it," I heard myself say. Grayson nodded, relief evident on his face. "Thank you. Just be careful. Whatever's out there, it's not natural. And it's not alone." We spent the next few hours going over Grayson's research. He had decades' worth of information, all meticulously organized. Newspaper clippings, hand-drawn maps, interview transcripts. It was overwhelming, but also exhilarating. For the first time in years, I felt like I was getting closer to answers. As I drove home that evening, my mind was racing. I knew going back to the Pine Barrens was dangerous, maybe even foolish. But I also knew I had to do it. The memory of those glowing eyes had haunted me for too long. It was time to face whatever was out there, once and for all. Over the next few weeks, I prepared for my return to the Pine Barrens. I told my boss I needed some personal time, citing family issues. I didn't like lying, but I knew the truth would sound insane. I gathered supplies, camping gear, a better camera than the one I'd had 5 years ago, a handheld GPS unit, and a satellite phone. I wasn't taking any chances this time. I also spent hours poring over Grayson's research, trying to piece together a coherent picture of what might be out there. The stories spanned more than a century, with the earliest dating back to the 1800s. They varied in details, but certain elements remained consistent. the towering figure, the matted fur, the glowing eyes, and that otherworldly sound. One account in particular stood out to me. It was from a trapper named John Erickson, dated 1932. He described not just seeing the creature, but following it to a clearing deep in the woods. There he claimed to have seen a ring of stones, ancient and worn, with markings like no language I've ever seen. At the center of the ring was a pit, so deep and dark it seemed to swallow the light. Erickson's account ended abruptly, with a note from Grayson saying the trapper had disappeared shortly after giving this statement. His body was never found. As the day of my departure approached, I found myself growing increasingly anxious. I checked and rechecked my gear, ran through scenarios in my head, and tried to prepare for every possibility. But deep down, I knew there was no way to truly be ready for what I might find. The night before I left, I sat down and wrote a letter to my sister. I explained everything: my encounter 5 years ago, meeting Grayson, and my plans to return to the Pine Barrens. I sealed the letter in an envelope and left it on my kitchen table, with instructions for it to be opened if I didn't return in 2 weeks. Early the next morning, I loaded up my truck and set out. Max, older now but still loyal, sat in the passenger seat. I had debated leaving him behind, not wanting to put him in danger, but in the end, I couldn't bear the thought of facing whatever was out there alone. The drive to the Pine Barrens was quiet. I tried to focus on the task ahead, on the practical aspects of what I was about to do. But my mind kept drifting back to that night 5 years ago, to the creature's eyes, and that bone-chilling sound. I arrived at the edge of the barrens just as the sun was starting to set. I found a small clearing off a dirt road and set up camp for the night. As darkness fell, the forest seemed to close in around me. The familiar sounds of the night crickets, frogs, the rustle of small animals were oddly muted, as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. I didn't sleep much that night. Every crack of a twig or gust of wind had me sitting up, peering into the darkness. Max stayed close, his warmth against my side a small comfort. As the first light of dawn broke through the trees, I packed up camp and prepared to head deeper into the barrens. According to Grayson's map, the area with the highest concentration of sightings was about a day's hike from where I'd camped. The hike was grueling. The terrain was rough, with dense underbrush and fallen trees blocking the way. Several times I had to consult the GPS to make sure I was still on track. Max trotted along beside me, occasionally darting off to investigate a scent but always returning quickly. As the day wore on, I began to notice subtle changes in the forest around me. The trees seemed older, more gnarled. The undergrowth thinned out, replaced by a thick carpet of moss. And the silence, which had been noticeable since I arrived, became almost oppressive. It was late afternoon when I first saw the stones. At first I thought they were just oddly shaped boulders, half buried in the forest floor. But as I got closer, I realized they were arranged in a rough circle, just like in John Erickson's account from 1932. My heart began to race as I approached the stone circle. The rocks were massive, easily twice my height, and covered in a thick layer of moss. As I brushed away some of the growth, I saw markings etched into the stone, strange symbols that looked like no language I'd ever seen. Max whined softly, pressing against my leg. I reached down to pat his head, trying to reassure him even as my own nerves were on edge. The air felt different here, heavier somehow, and the silence was absolute. No birds, no insects, not even the sound of wind through the trees. I set up my camera and began to document the site, taking photos of each stone and the markings on them. As I worked, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every few minutes I'd spin around, half expecting to see glowing eyes staring at me from the trees. But there was nothing, just the endless forest and the looming stones. As the light began to fade, I realized I needed to make a decision. It was too late to hike back to my campsite, but the thought of spending the night here, in this eerie clearing, made my skin crawl. In the end, practicality won out. I set up my tent at the edge of the clearing, positioning it so I could see the stone circle from the entrance. That night was the longest of my life. I lay awake, every sense straining for any sign of danger. Max was restless, pacing back and forth in the small confines of the tent. Sometime after midnight, I heard it, that low, rumbling sound that had haunted my dreams for 5 years. It started soft, almost at the edge of hearing, but grew steadily louder. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, vibrating through the ground and the air. Max began to growl, his hackles rising. I grabbed my flashlight and shotgun, my hands shaking as I unzipped the tent. The clearing was bathed in an unnatural light, seeming to emanate from the stones themselves. They glowed with a soft, pulsing blue light that cast long shadows across the forest floor. And there, at the center of the circle, was a sight that made my blood run cold. The creature stood there, its massive form silhouetted against the glowing stones. It was just as I remembered, impossibly tall, covered in matted fur, with long, clawed hands that nearly brushed the ground. But it was the eyes that held me transfixed. They glowed with the same eerie blue light as the stones, and as they locked onto mine, I felt a wave of terror wash over me. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, we stared at each other. I could feel the weight of its gaze, ancient and alien. Then, slowly, it raised one massive hand and pointed at the center of the circle. I followed its gesture and saw what I had missed before, a dark opening in the ground, perfectly circular and so deep that the light from the stones couldn't penetrate its depths. The pit that Erickson had described in his account. The rumbling sound grew louder, and I realized with a start that it was coming from the creature. It wasn't just noise, it was language. I couldn't understand the words, but I could feel their meaning resonating in my bones. It was a warning, or perhaps an invitation. Suddenly, Max let out a terrified yelp and bolted, disappearing into the dark forest. The spell broken, I stumbled backward, nearly falling in my haste to get away. The creature made no move to follow, but its eyes never left me as I scrambled to grab my gear and run. I crashed through the underbrush, heedless of the branches that whipped at my face and arms. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs threatened to give out, the sound of my own ragged breathing drowning out everything else. When I finally stopped, bent over and gasping for air, I realized I had no idea where I was. In my panic, I had dropped my GPS and lost all sense of direction. I was lost in the depths of the pine barrens with no way to find my way back. As the adrenaline faded, the full weight of my situation hit me. I was alone, lost in a forest that suddenly felt more alien than familiar, with no supplies and no way to call for help. And somewhere out there, that creature was still roaming. I spent the rest of the night huddled at the base of a large tree, jumping at every sound. As dawn broke, I tried to get my bearings, looking for any landmark that might guide me back to civilization. But the forest looked the same in every direction, endless pines stretching as far as the eye could see. With no better option, I picked a direction and started walking. I tried to keep the rising sun to my left, hoping it would lead me east and eventually out of the barrens. As I walked, I called out for Max, hoping against hope that he might have circled back and found me. But there was no response, just the oppressive silence of the forest. Hours passed, and my situation grew more desperate. I had no water, no food, and the September sun was beating down mercilessly. My thoughts began to wander, replaying the events of the night before. What was that creature? What was the significance of the stone circle in that bottomless pit? As the day wore on, I began to hear things, whispers just at the edge of hearing, movement in the corner of my eye. At first I dismissed it as my imagination, a product of fear and exhaustion, but as time passed the sounds grew more distinct. It was that rumbling language again, but softer now, almost coaxing. I tried to ignore it, to focus on putting one foot in front of the other, but with each passing hour my resolve weakened. The voices seemed to be offering answers, promising to reveal the secrets of the pine barrens if only I would turn back, return to the stone circle. It was nearing sunset when I saw it again. A flash of movement through the trees, a glimpse of matted fur and glowing eyes. My heart raced, but this time the fear was mixed with an odd sense of anticipation. Part of me, a part I didn't want to acknowledge, wanted to follow, to finally uncover the truth behind the legends. I stood there, swaying on my feet, caught between the instinct to run and the pull to follow. In that moment of indecision, I heard a sound that cut through the whispers and brought me back to reality, a dog's bark. "Max!" I called out, my voice hoarse. Another bark, closer this time, and then he was there, bursting through the undergrowth and leaping up to lick my face. The relief was overwhelming. I hugged him tight, burying my face in his fur. Max's appearance seemed to break whatever spell had been clouding my mind. The whispers faded, and when I looked up, the forest was just a forest again, no sign of glowing eyes or lurking shadows. With Max leading the way, nose to the ground, we finally found our way out of the barrens. It was well past midnight when we stumbled onto a road, and another hour before a passing truck stopped to help us. The driver, an older man named Bill, listened to my rambling explanation with a mix of concern and skepticism. He'd lived near the Pine Barrens all his life, he told me, and while he'd heard the old stories, he'd never put much stock in them. But something in my face must have convinced him I'd been through an ordeal, because he drove me all the way back to my truck without asking too many questions. As we drove out of the barrens, I watched the dark mass of trees recede in the rearview mirror. I knew I should feel relieved to be leaving, but instead I felt a strange sense of loss. Whatever was out there, whatever that creature was trying to show me, would remain a mystery. When I got home, I found my sister waiting for me, worry etched on her face. She'd gotten concerned when she couldn't reach me and had come to check on me. I hugged her tight, grateful for the warmth of human contact after the cold otherness of the barrens. In the days that followed, I tried to make sense of what had happened. I developed the photos I'd taken of the stone circle, but they came out blurry and indistinct, showing nothing but vague shapes in the forest. My frantic notes from that night were nearly illegible, filled with half-formed thoughts and sketches that made little sense in the light of day. I thought about contacting Robert Grayson, sharing what I'd discovered. But something held me back. The memory of those glowing eyes, of that rumbling voice that seemed to speak directly to my soul, felt too personal, too profound to share. In the end, I packed away my notes and photos, tucking them into a box in the back of my closet. I told myself I was putting the whole experience behind me, moving on with my life. But deep down I knew the truth. I was waiting for what, I wasn't sure. Another sign, perhaps. Another invitation. Years have passed since that night in the Pine Barrens. I've grown older, settled into a quieter life. Max is gone now, peacefully passing in his sleep at the ripe old age of 14. Sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind whispers through the trees outside my window, I find myself thinking about that stone circle, about the secrets buried deep in the heart of the forest. I've never gone back to the Pine Barrens, but sometimes in my dreams, I'm there again, standing at the edge of that dark pit, the creature beside me, its rumbling voice promising answers to questions I'm not sure I'm ready to ask. And every time, just before I take that final step into the unknown, I wake up. The Pine Barrens keep their secrets, but they're patient, and sometimes, when I look out at the distant line of trees on the horizon, I can't help but feel that they're waiting for me, waiting for the day when the pull of the unknown finally overcomes my fear, and I return to uncover the truth hidden in the shadows of the pines. For now, though, I live with the knowledge that there are things in this world beyond our understanding. The creature in the Pine Barrens, whatever it was, opened my eyes to a reality I never knew existed. It's a reality that's both terrifying and awe-inspiring, a reminder that the world is far stranger and more wonderful than we can imagine. As I sit here writing down this account of what happened to me, I can't help but wonder, who else out there has seen what I've seen? How many other people have encountered things that defy explanation, only to bury those experiences deep inside, afraid of the disbelief or ridicule they might face? If you're reading this and you've had your own brush with the unknown, know that you're not alone. The world is full of mysteries, some beautiful, some terrifying, and all worthy of exploration. Just be careful out there. And if you ever find yourself in the Pine Barrens and you hear a low rumbling sound echoing through the trees, remember my story. The choice of whether to run or to follow will be yours to make. As for me, I don't know what the future holds, but I do know that my experience in the Pine Barrens changed me forever. It opened my eyes to the possibility that there's more to our world than what we can see and touch. And while that knowledge sometimes keeps me up at night, it also fills me with a sense of wonder I wouldn't trade for anything. So here I am, an old man with a story that sounds too fantastic to be true. But I know what I saw, I know what I felt, and somewhere out there in the depths of the Pine Barrens, something ancient and unknowable is waiting for me or for someone else who's ready to face the mysteries that lurk in the shadows of our world. Until then, the Pine Barrens keep their secrets, and I'll keep watching the trees, listening for that rumbling call, and wondering what might have been if I'd had the courage to take that final step into the unknown.